Audio check. Okay, everybody's here. The inquiry is now resumed. Just hand back to you shortly, Mr. Henderson. Just myself and Mr. Ware just want to explore some of the issues that arose out of the line of questioning just before we broke about this information has been requested. Let me just ask you, Mr. Henderson, just so that me and Mr. Ware are crystal clear on it. What is the information exactly that was requested that has not been provided?
So I can point you to Mr. Collins's rebuttal proof of evidence where he summarised that. That's not, though, and let me give you the reference to that whilst we're on it, sir. So that's his rebuttal proof of evidence. And it's the, sorry, just bear with me, the penultimate page, so page 6 of 7, which is PDF page 8. 8, yeah. Now that though, sir, is a summary. It's not, as I understand it, the exact wording of the request. That's essentially a summary for your purposes of what the substance was. So you see, for example, the occupancy data part A, which is going to this point about when you add up 2017, 18, 19, get the average and then get your ratio. That's where that goes. Part B, the calculations and analysis to verify the additional parking demand. Well, that goes to the point we're on at the end about how do we get to ultimately the important figure, the 22.2 thousand. And then thirdly, the assessment of mode share to determine how revised increase in public transport usage will impact on parking demand. I'm about to do public transport share in it, sir, but essentially that goes to how's it being factored in.
Okay, and that's all still outstanding? It is, sir, yeah.
And you'll recall that I asked Mr. Collins about that yesterday. I think it was in his re-examination. It might have been in evidence in chief. I'm afraid it's a little bit blurred, but I asked him about that, and we did go to this document as part of his evidence as well, and he confirmed that. And I don't actually understand that to be disputed, sir, when I put the questions earlier. It's not that it wasn't provided as a question of the reason for that.
Mr. Whitchell, is all of this information, this is the information that's held by the external consultants, named
Teneo, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's all held by them, and they're the ones that have said no to this.
The answer to that is I don't know. I know there's been a dialogue with the airport, so I presume it's intellectual property or commercially confidential information.
Right. Okay. Right, just so that we're clear, one of the answers that you gave this morning was to the effect of, well, this information wasn't requested by the council during the application stage, and to which Mr. Henderson then said, but this is an update, talking about the updated parking study, this wasn't, that postdates the council's decision.
Precisely, sir, it does. I can take
so you haven't had chance to check that?
I can take you to the part of that document.
No, you don't need to do that. I just want to just be clear on
precisely,
that.
And the timeline's very important, sir, because of course that postdates all the discussions with officers and Jacobs and whoever else it may have been.
Right.
And for your purposes, sir, you're being told to look at the updated one. That's what you're being told to rely on.
Yeah. Okay, so my next question then is, was the same information that the council's now requesting in relation to the updated parking study requested by the council in relation to the original parking study during the application stage?
I don't believe they
would have been Jacobs then, would it?
I don't believe they requested a copy of the spreadsheet, but I'm aware they had meetings and reviewed and audited that.
Right, so the council's consultants at that time didn't request the information. It's only now being requested because we're in an appeal situation. That's the gist of it, isn't it?
I can't say for sure, so we'd have to go back and look at the correspondence, but my understanding is that the process works slightly differently in that, as Mr. Whitchell said, there was a series of meetings and discussions rather than a formal requesting and then responding. There was a mixture of, it was essentially a mixed mode of discussion. Whereas here, obviously, once after the point of determination, we're into a formal process and we've adopted a formal mode accordingly. Hence why we made the request in writing. We hoped we'd receive the response in writing and we'd have dealt with it. That was the intention.
Okay.
I think, sir, the other problem here may be that you remember with the cross-examination of Mr. Collis, who made points about utilization and occupancy demand ratios, and I cross-examined him on the basis that, well, those weren't used. And of course, what is being asked for is, what was the data used, for those things? So the first, car park occupancy data to verify the occupancy ratio used to determine operational utilization. I don't think the parking demand study used a ratio in quite that way. You remember I took you in the original parking demand study to that figure 15, which is a diurnal pattern of, cars arriving and cars leaving, and that. So I think there is a ratio used in that, and one can see that data, and one can see the ratios because they're set out below. But I don't think that's what's asked for, because what Mr. Collis was looking for was a 95%. Do you remember? 95% utilization. I don't think they use that, so there isn't a sort of figure like that can instantly be pulled off. The next one, calculation and analysis to verify additional demand, identified. I think it's that one that I think Teneo, because it's their intellectual property, are reluctant to hand over to a consultancy, another consultancy, their spreadsheets. But in PDF form, I understand quite a lot of data was supplied. Now, quite obviously from what Mr. Henderson said, not what he wants, but the underlying model, I think it's fair to say, hasn't been handed over. And then, third one, assessment of mode share to determine how revised increase in public transport usage will impact. Again, there isn't a mode share percentage which is directly input to the model. What gets input to the model is there are these public transport initiatives, and document INQ 35 was that page from the spreadsheet that says, look, we take these 6 initiatives and we assume that they have this effect on propensity to use public transport within these areas. And so more than happy, obviously, that the consultants discuss this, but I think part of the problem is that it's slightly like ships passing in the night. One side's asking for one thing, the other side's saying, well, we simply haven't got that, but that's not what we do. And what we need to try and do, I think, is try and find some kind of resolution that helps the council, but recognises that the model hasn't worked in, I think, quite the way that has been supposed.
So if I may, I'm afraid I don't accept the characterisation of ships passing the night. But even if that was accurate, what the applicant could have done, the appellant could have done there, say, look, we've got your request, we're not quite sure what you're after. Is it this, because we don't have it, or do you mean something else? We could have had a discussion. But we had no reply whatsoever. So if it was a case of the appellant sitting there going, hang on a minute, we don't really understand what the request is, the appropriate thing would be to write back and say, can you clarify what your request is? Because either we don't hold that data or we're not sure what data it is. And fundamentally, so, and we'll deal with it later, but we're a public inquiry where we need to scrutinise in the public interest, in everyone's interest, frankly, that material. So I'm afraid I don't.
Can Mr. Henderson just confirm my understanding that PDF data was sent for each of those 3 requests?
I'll have to double check with
I
Mr.
understand
Collins,
it
but we can pick that up. But in any event, it's
Yeah.
not that Mr. Witch has already accepted that the PDF's not a substitute. We know that.
It would be useful to have a discussion, I think, between you just to bottom this out. I mean, it's very frustrating for us as the inspectors to be here saying, well, we've asked for this and we haven't been given it, and oh, yes, you have, and no, you haven't, and we don't really know where we are with this. So we're getting, you know, we're just getting conflicting accounts. I mean, if the request's been made, I would make the point that it's never a good idea to ignore them. When you're going to come to a public inquiry, this is going to come out in the wash. So we recommend that isn't an approach that's repeated. I don't know, is there any way between the parties that you can agree on and get some sort of note, cobble a note together so we're clear as to what is specifically outstanding, what hasn't been provided, why is it important?
Yeah. Well, so that goes to, I think, the work streams for our team, more generally, and the demand on us. So I'll let Mr. Taylor field that, because that's going to involve resources, if I may.
So, I mean, from our perspective, we are the local planning authority. We have more resources than the Rule 6 parties. We have access to expertise at a level that they don't have. We have been seeking data on numerous areas. The passenger allocation model, for example, and we're going to be putting in a note on where we've got to on that later, where again we've hit a dead end because of commercial confidentiality, apparently. We're getting commercial confidentiality again in this circumstance. We keep on hitting up against issues where data's not being provided, where it is available, it's not being provided because of commercial confidential issues. We've seen the High Court recently in the Hope and Studios case opine on that particular issue and how parties need to work around those issues. We're quite happy to look at material in confidence so that we can form a view to inform you as to whether we think what's been done is robust and correct. Because if we get to that position, then there's no issue between us. But we have been prevented, and I use that word advisedly, prevented from getting to that point in numerous areas, and we're not done with them yet, in the run-up to this inquiry. It's frankly too late. We're here. This is the Surface Access Week. We're on the last witness. If we are to reopen all of these issues, we're going to have to extend the inquiry, and there are certainly going to be cost implications. And that's the reality here. So, I mean, Mr. Henderson and I are making our position very clear that in the absence of this data and in the absence of scrutiny of it, what the submission is going to be. You know, that's the position that frankly the airport's put itself into. Now, we're happy to explore, obviously, how we can assist the inquiry further, but there are limits to what can be achieved at this stage.
I think if I could jump in here, because obviously we were talking about this over lunch. I mean, we're certainly not suggesting that at this stage there should be, excuse me, there should be any more information coming in. That's not what we're about. But what we have been hearing a lot is this argument from the council. I'm not criticising, but the argument from the council that we, the council, are hamstrung by the absence of information. So I think what would help us is, as Mr. Young was saying, we've got a partial table that we've been helpfully referred to, or a list. What would help us is a list of, in the council's view, the key areas where information has been requested and for whatever reason no response, or a negative response or a lack of response. That would help us just as a factual position statement. And just pause for a second. So I think from the council to start with, a factual position statement, as you see it, as to what areas of concern to you have been the subject of requests that have not been in part or at all responded to. And that should be capable of being an agreed document, just as a pure matter of fact. I don't think, frankly, it would particularly help us to hear from, I mean, we've heard obviously from the appellant as to, in general terms, why those requests haven't been met. But I think if at least we can see what the requests are, what do they cover, what the response was, and then we can take it from there, see if we need anything further as to why there has been the response or lack of it. But let's try and just bottom out the facts to start with. The other thing that I would say whilst I'm speaking is that, again, over lunch, we were talking about, as it were, the council's position and what information you had before the determination of the application and where you are now. And I do now understand, thank you for that, that the process involved was different. And obviously there are, at that stage, we hear there are a series of discussions, whatever those discussions were, it got the council and its consultants to the position that we know about. Matters have now changed, it's a different process. I'm good with that, but I couldn't quite, over lunch, I couldn't quite understand why there appeared to be a different process before and after, and that I understand. So does that cover it? Could we...
Yes, sir. I think it's not the process is different because the model's the same. It's the inputs, in effect, you know,
yeah, sure.
the data. What we can do as part of that, which I think you've asked, was what the responses were. So we'll obviously have the responses and the data to these 3 requests that was put in, because not all of that is obviously before the inquiry. And I think what we probably need to do is try and sort of talk to the council and put things in and see how far we can get with that, and then obviously at the end of the day you'll have to decide whether you need to see more or what you want, and we'll have to do what we can to help you.
Well, I think, as I said before, I think from our point of view, what we're not asking for is more data.
Okay.
I mean, frankly, we're at a stage now, as has been said, we're on the last eyewitness witness. I don't think we're definitely not sitting here asking for more data, because the implications of providing that are fairly horrendous for everybody. I think what we need to understand, because it's obviously an important matter for the council, what we need to understand is what have you asked for, what have you not got, and put bluntly, why does it matter? Now, the why does it matter, I have got no doubt we'll be hearing from in closing submissions, but, you know, just as a sort of straightforward summary so we know where we are.
Okay.
Yeah, it's certainly achievable, sir.
Okay.
If I may. Yeah, thank you. Need to just finish off parking, please, Mr. Witchells, and the question now is the public transport percentage. Can I ask you to pick up the table that I talked you through before lunch, and which we reached agreement over? If we look at the first row, please, baseline passengers parking. It's the handout, so it's the loose. Sorry, I should have been a bit clearer. Looks like that. Yeah. For the 2018 parking demand study, you started with 1.7 million passengers in 2017, and that was of a 12.5% mode share, public transport mode share, calculated on the basis of the bus ticket data, wasn't it?
The basis for the mode share at that time was bus ticket data.
And it was 12.5%.
It was understood to be 12.5%.
Yeah. And if we go to the next row, which is the 2020 update,
Yes.
you had a figure of 1.73 passengers in 2019, but the mode share information that we have for that is the CAA data, and as I understand it, it's a 21.8%.
That's correct.
Figure.
Yes.
What I haven't seen in your material is I haven't seen an indication of what the calculation of mode share was in terms of the bus ticket data in 2019. That's not been provided in your evidence, has it?
No, I don't have the bus ticket data for.
Sorry, just say that again.
I don't
please.
have the bus ticket data for.
Right, so you don't have the bus ticket data for 2019?
No.
Right.
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry, I'm not...
Could we don't have a copy of...
Oh, I'm very sorry. I
document
thought
that was handed out.
they'd been handed out. That's entirely my fault. I thought we had
No,
enough
we just
copies.
handed out at the...
Let's just... Yeah.
That's very kind, thank you.
Let me see if we've got a spare. Here we do. Would you mind? I'm very sorry about that. Sorry, so I'll... It's row 1 on that table that we were just looking at. Can I ask you please to pick up the 2018 parking demand study? This is CD 2.11, please. And can you go please to PDF page 23 in that document? And let me know when you're there.
Do you have a paragraph number?
It's the figure 19,
Figure
on
19.
PDF page 23.
Thank you.
And this explains the process that you undertook when you did your 15% sensitivity. And we've covered it briefly before, going from the 2015 CAA data, you then went to the, you then adjusted that for 12.5%, and then you uplifted it to 15%. Yeah? That's
Yes.
the process you undertook. And the uplift that you applied, you were applying in the 20, the uplift you were applying was in the 12 million scenario, wasn't it? It was the comparison between 12.5% at 12 million and 15% at 12 million.
Yes, that was.
Thank you. Now, can we go please to the 2020 parking demand study? So this is CD 223. And can you look please at page 15 of this document, paragraph 4.9. And it's the final sentence of this document, that paragraph. You say the park and fly calculation implicitly includes the increase in public transport as outlined in section 5. Let's go through to section 5, please, on page 19. Sorry, page 21. And it's paragraph 5.5. Since our analysis is based on actual parking demand data as the starting point, rather than an estimate based on applying a mode split to the number of passengers, we've considered the impact of the proposed relative increase in public transport use, as well as other measures, such as those targeted at reducing kiss and fly trips on overall forecast parking demand. Now, you've explained this also in your rebuttal proof of evidence, so can I ask you to pick that up? I will ask you the question, I just want to take you through the process first. This is your rebuttal proof of evidence, please. PDF page 26. And when you get there, it's paragraph 2.3.7. You say that Mr. Collins is also wrong to state that the PDS 2020 is based on a 17.5% PT mode share. The paragraph of the PDS 2020 to which Mr. Collins refers clearly relates to the historic bus ticket data approach, but goes on in the following paragraphs to set out that the PDS update applied an uplift of 2.5% PT mode share relative to the 2019 level. And then the final part here, page 26, PDF page 26.
Same document.
Yes, same document, yes, so I should have been clear. Sorry, I was on page 26. That's a terrible reference from me. I'm very sorry about that. Well, in fact, I don't need to take you to it. I'm happy with what we've done. So if we just look at your explanation there, your 2.3.7, what you're telling us is that you applied your 2.5 percentage increase to the 2019 baseline, didn't you?
Yes, it was applied to the recorded data in 2019.
Yeah, so you took your 1.73 million passengers and you applied your 2.5% to that, didn't you?
But it's not as simple as applying it to the total passengers. It's done on a corridor by corridor and
yes, on a
basis.
segment by segment basis. Yeah.
Yeah.
What you didn't do though was you didn't apply 2.5% to the 10 million baseline of 15% measured in bus ticket data or whatever its equivalent was in CAA data. You didn't do that, did you?
Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I'll put the question again.
Yeah.
You applied the 2.5% to the 2019 baseline, as you've just explained. What you didn't do, though, was you didn't work out what the demand was based on a 15% target at 10 million passengers and then uplift that to 2.5. That's not what you did, is it?
No, we uplifted from the figure in 2019,
Yeah.
which was the 21.8 CAA data.
Yeah, but the problem with that is this, that the 21.8 CAA data share in 2019, that's not equivalent to the 15% passenger public transport target at 10 million, is it?
Well, I think it's well, it's better than that actually. I think it is. I think what it's a reflection of is that the target that was set then. The airport has obviously introduced a series of measures that have meant that public transport share has improved, and effectively they've already met what would have been their 10 million obligation. So by the time they got to 2019, they'd already achieved that mode share.
You couldn't know if they'd met their obligation under the 106 because you didn't have the bus ticket data in order to measure it. The 106 is based on measuring 15% on the basis of bus ticket data. You didn't have that information, did you?
No, I didn't.
No. So you had no way of knowing, therefore, without that information, whether the 2019 baseline was equivalent to meeting your Section 106 target, could you?
I only had the indication from the CAA data.
Yeah, but we can't compare the CAA data and the bus transport data, can we? We have to adjust them as you did in the original study.
Yeah, I still think it's reasonable to use the CAA data, and I think the aim of the targets and the authority at the time was to say what do we believe is a reasonable public transport mode share, and that's where those numbers came from. And we now, from CAA data, we now know that the mode share was 21.8%.
But at the very start of this cross-examination, I asked you to confirm the basis on which the mode share was being offered. And you were very clear, and we agreed that the mode share is 2.5% on top of the 10 million baseline of 15%. You recall those questions at the start?
I do, and as I said,
no, that's
I believe...
entirely wrong. You asked him in relation to the data whether the 17.5% was on top of 15, but it's very clear from the conditions that we're negotiating that the 2.5% will be added to the CAA data.
Well, I don't accept it. I'll put the questions again. If there's any ambiguity about it,
in a sense,
I'll put
you
the
don't need
question.
to. We've said it will be reflected in the discussions tomorrow that the 2.5% will go on top of the CAA percentage. There's no dispute about that.
I'm sorry, I don't accept that. Look, and I'll put it to the witness so it's very clear. Your proof of evidence, please.
But do we need to, in a sense, argue about it? I'm telling you that we're very happy that the condition that sets the target is 2.5% on top of the CAA data.
I'm afraid we do, because the 2.5% has to be on top of what's already been secured under the 10 million limit, because that was the whole point. When it went to committee, you recall it's 2.5%, and that was expressed as 17.5% because we were uplifting from 15%. We've secured 15% under the 2011 permission. We need to uplift that now to 17.5%. Now, of course, you can measure that in terms of the CAA data if you rebase it. But you've got to rebase it. You've got to work out, well, what is my 15% target rebased? We don't know what that is. And then once you know that, you apply your 2.5% to that. And can I just ask you, please, Mr. Witchells, your CD 223, which is the document we're in, can I ask you to go to page 21 of that? That's PDF page 21, and it's sorry, I've taken you to the wrong document. Thrown out of my, it's CD 223. It's paragraph 5.3 on PDF page 21. You see, 5.3, you say this: the above targets, so you're referring there to the 2 bullet points above, which say 15% and 17.5%, will be rebased as necessary in consultation with NSC as part of the proposed annual monitoring process using a method of measurement consistent with that of the CAA. But the key factor is the proposed percentage increase in public transport use, 2.5%, rather than the actual value, which may vary depending on the agreed method of measurement. And what that 2.5% is relative to is the change between 15 and 17.5% if you measure it on the basis of the bus data, or a change on a rebased calculation between 2 CAA figures, isn't it?
No, as I said earlier, I think in the absence of the CAA data at the time, the targets were felt to be quite onerous, realistic, if you like, stretch targets.
I'm sorry, you're not answering the question.
I'm just coming to that. Therefore, I do believe that now we have already achieved 21.8% as a public transport mode share. It is perfectly reasonable to say we've actually effectively met our 10 million commitment, so we are prepared to aim to achieve a further 2.5% on top of that.
Can I ask you to pick up your proof, please, your proof of evidence? Can I ask you to go to page 27 of this? And can I ask you to go to paragraph 4.5.3 on that page? A key objective of the ASAS, the first sentence of that paragraph, is therefore to increase public transport use from the 10 million passengers per annum baseline by 2.5%. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
So we need to understand that, however you measure it, whether you measure it with bus ticket data or CAA data, we need to know what the 10 million passengers per annum baseline is, don't we?
Yes, and my position is I think we've already met that. I don't think we're going to increase by doing nothing. So we are going to, as part of the updated ASAS and the Section 106, put in additional measures, should we get consent, should the airport get consent, additional measures to go beyond that, another 2.5% on what has already been achieved at 21.8%.
Mr. Witchells, what evidence have you produced which shows that the figure in 2019, the 21.8 CAA figure, what evidence have you which shows that that is equivalent to or above the 15% target which was secured in the 106? What evidence have you produced of that?
Well, as I say, I don't have the bus ticket data for that.
So you haven't even done the calculation then? You haven't even considered whether the 21.8% CAA figure is equivalent to the figure which was secured in the 106? You haven't considered that, have you?
The context of those numbers is those public transport mode shares were believed to be the public transport mode share. The fact they were measured with bus ticket data is the way in which it was measured, but it was believed to be the overall public transport mode share at the time. And I think the basis of the targets was to say, you know, we need to improve on that. We need to keep stretching these targets. Now we actually know from the CAA data that we have achieved 21.8, and I think it's, in my opinion, that suggests that the investments have worked. We've achieved a very good target, and now we should stretch that by a further 2.5%.
In your original park and demand study, 2.11, page 23, figure 19, which we've already looked at, you had CAA data there, and that CAA data shows, I'll wait till you're there, when we look at the middle column, CAA 2015 public transport mode share, that data showed 16.1%. Okay, but you didn't just say, oh well, look, we'll apply it to that. What you did was you rebased it to 12.5%, so it matched the same metric that was being used for the target. Once you got that metric, you then increase that metric. But what you've done here, because you couldn't do it because you didn't have the data, is you haven't rebased so that you're comparing a like metric with a like metric.
No, we haven't. But if we've gone from 16.1 to 21.8, then that...
But that your methodology is entirely inconsistent then. In the first original part in demand
we are
study...
saying we're going to rebase to CAA data to remove these anomalies.
No, let me finish the question. In your 2.11, CD 2.11, your 2018 study, you conducted your uplift using the parking demand data because you had to rebase the CAA to get to the parking
Yes.
demand data. You did not undertake the same rebasing exercise when you did the updated study in 2020, did you?
No, as I say, we took the measured data in 2019, which we knew was 21.8. We weren't able to compare with bus data, so we didn't do that.
And because you weren't able to compare the bus data, you didn't know on that metric, which is the 106 metric, you didn't know whether you were at, below, or above the target, did you? Because you simply didn't compare it.
We didn't have the data, so we couldn't confirm that.
Right.
That's correct.
And if you didn't have the data, you don't know if the 21.8% that you did apply, the CAA data that you did apply your uplift to, you don't know if that's equivalent to the 15% target in the Section 106 agreement as measured by the bus data. You just don't know if that's the same, above or below, do you?
No, we can't confirm that, no.
You can't
Yes,
confirm that. And because you can't confirm that, you can't confirm that you applied the 2.5% to the right starting point, can you? Because the starting point must be the target secured in the 106 already. So you simply don't know, do you?
No, we're saying we're going to aim for a 2.5% uplift based
Uplift?
on a rebased figure
Yeah,
with new
but you-
CAA data. So
But you didn't rebase, did you? You didn't say, right, we've got
Well,
a
we
CAA figure.
haven't. We will rebase if
You
this
will.
appeal is successful.
Okay, you might do that, but you didn't do it when you prepared this study, did you?
Well, we took the CAA data as a guide because that's what we're going to rebase to.
I'll finish this very shortly. Because you didn't use the correct starting point, you don't have an assessment of demand based on 2.5 uplift from the correct baseline, do you?
We have the uplift on the baseline that we intend to use, the rebased baseline.
Right. Just go back to my table and we'll look at the outputs now. When we got the 2018 parking demand study, 12.5% assumed mode share produced 22.6 thousand car parking space demand. You then adjusted that, you got your 21.9 thousand demand. Now, on your answers that you've just given me, the mode share on your case is greater than that 15% figure there, isn't it? When you did your calculation, you think you're beyond that now. That's the evidence you're now giving.
We're starting at the 21.8 and
Yeah.
aiming for 2.5, yes.
Yeah. But you say you started at that higher point, but you reached a figure which is actually lower. The 22,200 figure that you've now calculated is actually lower than the 21.9 thousand figure that you calculated with a 15% public transport mode share. So you're below a figure which has a lower percentage of public transport mode share? It makes no sense, does it?
They're different bases. So even in the original study, that was recorded data at the time. So the mode share is what it is. It was presumed to be 12.5 because of the bus ticket data. So now we're at 22,200 based on a target 2.5% improvement. Previously, as you say, the number was 21,900 based on that 2.5% improvement.
Your position then, as I understand, is we can't compare the two. Is that right?
They're calculated in a different way, but you can use them as a guide, but essentially both are showing the effect of the 2.5% shift.
Let's look then, let's just take your 22,200 figure at face value and see where it leads us. If the council's right, the questions I've just put to you, and that figure doesn't accurately reflect the uplift, it's from the wrong baseline, then the only information we have from the proper baseline, the correct baseline, is what you did back in 2018, and that shows a lower demand figure, doesn't it?
For the 12 million passengers, are you referring to the 21,900?
Yeah, 21,900. It shows a lower figure. If that's the right way to approach this exercise.
Hypothetically, if the council are right, you would say yes.
Yeah.
21,900 came out of the previous study, and we're now at 22,200.
Yeah, and if that previous study was undertaken on the proper basis, and you'd actually gone for an even greater mode share, you'd taken your 15% as your 10 million target and you'd applied it to that, you'd have ended up with a lower figure, something below 21.9. We don't know where, but it would have been lower, wouldn't it?
Well, no, because it was working from a different base. So the 12.5 and the 15 was a 2.5% improvement, whereas now we're doing the same from the...
Yeah, but the 15% though, measured in bus ticket data, that was the target, wasn't it? And at the time that you produced your parking demand study, that's all you were offering. You weren't offering any more. You were saying, look, we've committed to 15% in the 106, we're going to roll it forward, and you assessed it on that basis, didn't you?
Yes, again, and on a relative increase, so on a presumption that the baseline mode share was 12.5, to increase it by 2.5. So it's the same thing. You're taking the measured data at the time of actual cars parked, presuming you had 12.5%, you may not have, but presuming that, then to improve that by 2.5%, which gives you that reduction there to 21,900.
If we have a figure that's actually lower than your 22,200, that's going to result in fewer car parking spaces needing to be provided in the green belt, isn't it?
If the figure were lower, clearly you need fewer spaces. Although, what we must bear in mind that is, in the way the model works, there's a decent proportion of competition off airport car parking, because the gross figure is over 30,000. So even if you did reduce that down, you would still have that latent demand for parking that isn't coming to the airport, is parking elsewhere in the green belt or in other car parks.
And earlier I asked you about a no development baseline applying MSCP1 and MSCP2 to the 2017 figure, and we got to 19,000 on that approach. If you were to add MSCP3 with its 1.5 thousand capacity to that, we get to 0.5 thousand without any further car parking in the green belt. And if the figure...
With no development, you mean? So no improvement,
Yes,
no
we take-
gyratory. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we don't, yes,
Yeah.
if the expansion is refused,
Yeah. But what we don't know is if you were to build MSCP3 alone, you weren't to extend into the green belt. And the figure of 22.2 is wrong, and it's actually some lower figure. We don't know whether that provision of MSCP3 would be sufficient by itself or not, do we?
well, you're quite far apart in terms of the demand and the available capacity then. So I think you'd need to do something. Your demand would be quite a way above your capacity. So you would either allow external off-site greenbelt or other car parks to soak up that demand,
All right,
or
we'll come on to that. Let's move on to the seasonal restriction issue now. The Silver Extension Phase 1, so Trod Loop 1 I think it's referred to in the parking demand study, that's subject to seasonal restrictions, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Can we look please at CD 223, which is the parking demand study and for the winter period, and page 20 of that please, figure 15.
Did you say 223?
Yeah, I did, yeah, which is the update. Sorry, I gave you right reference, wrong document. CD
that's right.
223.
Yeah,
sorry,
you threw me out.
223.
That's not the winter
No,
demand
sorry,
study.
my mistake. 223,
Right. Yeah.
which is the updated 2020
Yeah,
parking
thank you.
demand study.
Thanks.
And you've given us here your figure 15 on page 20. What you say is the updated seasonal position, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And in you've calculated here the total amount of demand for both on-site and off-site car parking, haven't you?
Yes.
And you've put that against a threshold in 2030, a capacity threshold of 13.6 thousand spaces, haven't you?
The dotted line is an indication of
Yeah.
that.
And that, you say, is the winter capacity forecast. And that doesn't include, I assume, Trod Loop 1, because what you're trying to show is that if you don't have it, it's not enough. So 13.6 is calculated without taking Trod Loop 1 into account, isn't it?
It looks to exclude the winter, the all-round use of Cog Loop 1. Yeah.
Sorry, say that again?
Because it's only permitted to use
Yeah.
in the summer months. So, yeah, there's no presumption here that will be allowed.
Correct. So the capacity of Trod Loop 1 we know is 3,700, isn't it?
It's 3,750.
Do you want me to show you where that is? Yeah. 3.6.2, please. CD 3.6.2, yeah. PDF page 12 in that document. Your figure 12 at the bottom. And you indicate there Trod Loop 1 3.7 thousand capacity.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we just bearing in mind that's the capacity, if we go back please to the figure 15 in the updated study that we were looking at. If in 2030 you've got a baseline of 18,000 available spaces in the summer, which we've already looked at, and you take your 3.7 thousand for Trod Loop 1 out of it, you get to a baseline of 14,300, don't you?
you allow all year use of cog loop.
No, if you take it out. So start with it. So what we're trying to say is, you've got a summer baseline for your updated study of 18,000, haven't you?
Well, the 18,000 is, or 18,100 in the trajectory is where you get to if the development goes ahead.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we're suggesting we would need MSCP3 and Silver Zone extension.
What I'm trying to understand is how have you reached your figure of 13.6 thousand as the winter capacity in figure 15? Where does that come from?
Well, that will be from the airport, the operational capacity during the winter. Obviously, once they've shut down the zones that are only operational during the summer.
Yeah, but we know the only car park that shuts is Cod Loop 1, which is 3,700. And if you've got a baseline of 18,000, and you take your 3,700 off from that because you shut it, you get 14,300. But that's not the same as your 13.6 figure here, is it?
No, as I say, the 18,100 is a slightly different thing because it's on the basis that we're developing out the master plan.
Well, explain
yeah.
to me then how you calculated 13.6 as your capacity.
Well, it's from the airport data on the number of usable spaces in the winter months when that's closed.
Number of spaces in the winter months. Okay, but if we... where do I see that calculation? Or can you explain it to me?
The calculation isn't in the parking demand study. It simply gives you the number.
I'm sorry, where is it? Can you take me to it?
Sorry, the calculation is not in the study. You're simply given the number.
Okay, can you explain it to me?
Yeah, in terms of the overall number, it's the total
Yeah,
from
but
the airport's
Right, okay,
operational figures.
let's take it like this. 13.6, which car parks have been included in that threshold?
Well, that should be all of the operational car parks, excluding the winter use of cog loop.
But just tell me which car parks that is.
In terms of the position today, the long stay and short stay car parks, MSCP1, and the 7,650 spaces in Silver Zone, plus 600 meet and greet.
Okay, well, let's look at it a different way. If that's your capacity in 2030 without Cod Loop 1 of 13.6, and if we add the 3.7 to that, let's assume you get permission to open Cod Loop 1, you get a different figure. You get 17.3, which is a different figure to the 18,000 that you've shown elsewhere for your baseline, don't you?
No, we get, as it is today, we get to 17,700 with all the car parks open.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, that what's on the airport now and usable.
But if we started with the Wood survey, right, which I don't want to go back to, but the Wood survey worked out 18,400 car parking spaces, didn't it? That was possible under the current permission.
It did say that, yes.
It did, right. And that included Cod Loop 1, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, so if we take that 18,400 and we shut Cod Loop 1 because we're in the winter months, yeah? If we shut that, we get to a figure which is higher than the 13.6 shown here, isn't it?
Yeah, so again, on the basis that this development doesn't go ahead, yes, you would.
Yes, you would. So your capacity here doesn't accurately reflect what the baseline is in winter in the no development scenario, does it?
Yeah, I mean, in the no development scenario, we're moving to a different place where we're not doing the upgrades, we're not doing the gyratory, so there could be more spaces.
Right. And
put in.
what's that figure? No development in winter, Cod Loop 1 shut. What's the figure?
Well, if the development doesn't go ahead, 18,700 is the reported total allowed as stated in the committee report.
No, well, and do you think that's the accurate figure? 18,700? You say that's the no development baseline?
That's the figure that the airport will be permitted to provide.
That's the figure, Mr. Should we move on?
Yeah, I gave them every opportunity, so we'll have to move on. Can we deal, please, with the question of costs and off-site car parking? CD 223, which is the document we're in, can I ask you to move, please, to page 24 and paragraph 6.5. Same document, yeah. Paragraph 6.5 on page 24. Final sentence here, you say, based on the demographic analysis of the catchment, lower cost parking solutions, such as those provided by Silver Zone Extension Phase 2, are still more likely to meet customer needs and effectively attract customers who may otherwise choose to park at off-site locations. And so, as I understand it, the reason why you say Silver Zone Extension Phase 2 here will be more preferable is because it's cheaper to park at, is that right?
Sorry, were you at 6.4, did you say?
6.5, final sentence.
Yeah.
The reason why
Yes,
you
yeah.
say it's be preferred is because it's cheaper, yes?
Yes, one of the aims, of course, is to reduce the demand for unauthorised and other greenbelt parking areas which compete on price. So one of the ways to draw them back to the airport is to price accordingly.
And off-site car parking is always going to undercut the provision that you make on the airport, isn't it? It's always going to be cheaper. They'll just drop their prices.
Well, I wouldn't say it's always going to be cheaper. They're all in the same market competing for spaces, so not necessarily always going to be cheaper. You know, they'll try to at least price match, or they'll aim to better, I'm sure.
So will they or won't they adjust their prices so they are no more expensive, let's put it like that, so they are no more expensive than what you provide on airport? They'll adjust it like that, won't they?
Well, it depends what their operating cost base is and whether they can afford to do that, but I'm sure if they can afford to lose margin, they would do so.
Do you have any evidence that they won't adjust their fees so they're cheaper? Because Mr. Collins explained that in his view they're always going to undercut. Do you have any evidence which goes against that?
I haven't done a detailed analysis of off-site parking demand in terms of their costs.
Right, and if you haven't done a detailed analysis of off-site car parking in terms of its cost, you don't know what the effect then of more low-cost parking at the airport will be when it's placed into that market, because you just haven't looked at it, have you?
Well, yes, we've looked at, in terms of the rationale for those statements is looking at a series of feedback reports from passengers, something called a Pragma survey as well, which asked people why they parked where they parked, what reasons that they had stated. You have a more secure environment, you're closer to the airport, you've got a very reliable shuttle bus. So you can't just say that you'll just go for the cheapest option all the time.
You don't present any evidence which shows that it would be unviable for MSCP3 to be developed first and to provide low-cost car parking there, do you? There's no evidence to show that that's unviable.
With the MSCP3, the proposal to introduce that is to meet a market demand for more premium parking closer to the terminal.
Okay, but let's put it like this. If the benefit of the Silver Zone extension is it's going to be cheaper for passengers, yeah? That's what
It's
yeah.
possible to make it cheaper because of its lower cost.
Yeah, you haven't produced any evidence which shows that MSCP3 can't be put into operation and utilised at an equivalent cost to the customer, can you?
Well, MSCP3, as I say, is intended to be a premium product that is close to the terminal, so there is an issue over artificially reducing prices and anti-competitive operations, so that's part of it. But
Well, I'll come on to the competition point in just a moment, but there is nothing stopping you from delivering MSCP3 at the same price to a customer as you intend to deliver the Silver Zone extension phase 2, is there? You could do that if you wanted to.
Well, obviously it depends on the margin. The operating cost of MSCP3 is going to be higher. It's a structure that needs to be maintained. It has barriers. It's got things that, ramps and stuff.
But you haven't produced any evidence which shows that those costs make it prohibitively expensive.
I haven't given you those costs, no.
And there's no evidence to show that before the inquiry, is there?
No.
Right. Now, competition. Can I just ask you, please, I think it's in your rebuttal proof of evidence, isn't it? The note from Womble Bond Dickinson dealing with competition.
Can you...
I'll just tell you which appendices it is. I just misplaced my reference to it. Actually, I think I'm in the wrong document, that's why. It's your main proof, isn't it? Where's your note from Womble Bond Dickinson about competition?
I don't think I have one.
That's Mr. Mellin.
Yes. Sorry. It did sound strange.
You raised the issue of competition. Do we put those questions about competition to him or to you?
Yes, I'm not a specialist or don't purport to be in competition law.
Okay, fine. So you mentioned competition, but you accept that you've got no expertise in that to say whether that is always in an accurate position, and we've got to pick it up with him.
Planning and transport, I'm not an expert in car
Fine.
park or other competition law.
That's absolutely fine. Right, public transport mode share then. Sorry, there's one point. MBU, just before we leave. CD 6.4, please, just to finish off car parking. MBU, PDF page 9, paragraph 1.22.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get
Yeah,
to
let me know when you're...
6.4.
It's CD 6.4.
Yeah, just opening. Which page, sorry?
Page 9, PDF page 9,
Thanks.
1.22. The government recognises the impact on communities living near airports and understands their concerns over local environmental issues, particularly noise, air quality and surface access. As airports look to make the best use of their existing runways, it's important that communities surrounding those airports share in the economic benefits of this, and that adverse impacts such as noise are mitigated where possible. Sharing economic benefits with communities, one way of doing that would be to deliver your MSCP3 car parking first at a low cost inside the Greenbelt inset, wouldn't it, so that you don't have the adverse impact on the Greenbelt. That would be sharing the benefits, wouldn't it?
The objective is equally parking in Silver Zone would deliver benefits. The economic benefit extends beyond just that offer of parking. you know, it's new employment opportunities and other associated benefits.
Yeah. But if let's assume that if the airport has to offer that car parking, it could offer it at a lower rate. It's going to get less profit, of course, but it could offer MSCP3 at a lower rate instead of the Silver Zone extension first. That would be one way of the airport sharing the economic benefits in the way that this policy intends, because it's reducing its profit level to share the benefit of expansion, isn't it?
Yes, obviously I haven't seen the revenue and profit or otherwise figures, so I can't really say whether that would or wouldn't be the case.
Right.
I don't know whether that would lead to a disbenefit or not.
Well, if you haven't seen it, then I don't think I can take that any further. Public transport mode share, please. Can we look at national aviation policy and how you deal with it in your documents, not anybody else's? So the transport assessment first, please. CD 2.5.9. And within that document, can I ask you to turn to PDF page 31. Sorry, PDF page 3 first. We'll take it in stages. This is a document dated December 2018, isn't it? We see that on page 3, just a document control sheet.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and can you go forward, please, to page 31 now, paragraph 3.1.2. And you list there the policy documents that you've reviewed in preparing this assessment, and you don't refer at all to the aviation policy framework, do you?
No, not in this document. This was a suite of documents as part of the application, so others did.
And the APF was published in March 2013, so you could have referred to it here. There was nothing stopping you doing so, was there?
No, nothing stopping us doing it, but we focused on the ones that were reviewed and the key policy commitments or policy aims of those documents.
Okay, can we look please at the transport assessment addendum, so that's CD 220.3. And within that, we know that the date of this on page 3 is the 18th of November 2020. That's right, isn't it? That's when you produced this document.
Yes.
Yeah, and PDF page 9, please. You tell us there that you reviewed relevant transport policies at national, regional and local levels to identify any changes since the original transport assessment was submitted in 2018. And then you've included that in Appendix A, and Appendix A is PDF page 72, so can you go there, please? And then that's the PDF page 72 is the front cover. We turn over, we've got your technical note. And under national policy, we see a reference to the NPPF. But there's no reference there, is there, to either the APF or to Aviation 2050, is there?
No, there isn't.
Right, can I ask you to pick up the APF, please? This is CD 6.1. And can I ask you to go to page 37 of that document? Paragraph 1.96 on page 37, high quality, efficient and reliable road and rail access to airports contributes greatly to the experience of passengers, freight operators and people working at the airport. Greater use of low carbon modes to access airports also has the potential to reduce CO2 emissions as well as leading to less congestion and improving air quality. Do you see that?
Yes.
Low carbon modes of transport, that would include public transport, wouldn't it?
Yes, if it's well used, yes.
Yeah. And so we can agree that this expresses an imperative in national policy to make greater use of low carbon measures such as public transport. That's right, isn't it?
That would be one example, public transport, yes.
Yep.
Reducing CO2 can cover many areas, such as reducing the number of two-way trips where one of those legs is empty, for example.
And can you go to page 75, PDF page 75 of this document, please? Paragraph 5.11.
Yes.
All proposals for airport development must be accompanied by clear surface access proposals which demonstrate how the airport will ensure easy and reliable access for passengers, increase the use of public transport by passengers to access the airport, and minimise congestion and other local impacts. So again, very clear the imperative to increase the use of public transport, isn't it?
Well, easy and reliable access is one thing, and that's important, but also increasing use of public transport is another thing,
Yep.
which obviously
It's another thing,
part
yep.
of the package.
Thank you. Both of those are relevant to considering the proposed development, aren't they? Both of those paragraphs?
Yes, they're relevant.
Yep. Aviation 2050, please. This is CD 6.5. And can I ask you to go, please, to page 66 of this document? PDF page 66, and then paragraph 3.67.
Sorry, it's still loading.
66, paragraph 3.67. Have you got it, Mr. Witchells? Or?
Yep, just
Yep.
on 66 now.
It's important to have good surface access links with airports. All proposed airport developments need to be accompanied by clear surface access proposals which demonstrate how the airport will ensure easy and reliable access for passengers, increase the use of public transport and minimise congestion, emissions and other local impacts. Do you see that?
Did you say 65?
66.
66.
And it's paragraph 3.67 under the heading surface access.
367.
Oh,
Sorry.
68. I think it depends how your PDF appears. But
Mine, yeah, sorry, mine's come up as page 68. Sorry, that's why. I
yeah,
couldn't find it.
3.67, paragraph
Thank you.
3.67.
Right, thanks.
And that's the same imperative to have clear surface access proposals which demonstrate an increased use of public transport. That's clearly stated, isn't it?
Yes, it's the same policy, the same
Yep.
objectives.
And if that was probably all we need to do. No, one more, I'm afraid. Can I ask you to go forward to PDF page 76? And it's page 3, it's paragraph 3.99.
Sorry, same document, did you say?
Yeah, same document, yeah.
Actually, I've lost it now. Which was the CD refs? Apologies.
6.5,
6.5, thank you.
and it's PDF page 76.
Thanks.
And it's paragraph 3.99 at the bottom.
Yep.
The government's expectations that airports, through their surface access strategy, set targets for sustainable passenger and staff travel to the airport, which meet, where possible, the ambitions set by the government and for those to be monitored by their respective airport transport forums. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we keep reading, the government's analysis shows that by 2050, although there are expected to be 70% more surface access journeys as a result of increased aviation demand, developments already in the pipeline such as cleaner engine technology, electrification of cars and decarbonisation of rail electricity could keep surface transport carbon emissions at similar levels today, unless airports also deliver more ambitious mode share targets. Do you see that?
Yes.
So there's a clear policy imperative in national aviation policy to set ambitious mode share targets, isn't there?
There is more ambitious mode share targets.
And that's relevant to the proposed development, isn't it?
Yeah, the whole policy is, in terms of the improved surface access and sustainable transport.
And in order to set an ambitious target, you need to understand what can be achieved and what can't be achieved. You've got to undertake an assessment of that, don't you?
Well, yes, this is the position we're in. We have to base it on what has been achieved to date and then try to better that.
Yeah.
So our target is to improve on that.
Yeah, and you need to to be ambitious, you need to understand, well, is that going to be something that we can achieve easily, or is it something that we're going to have to strive for, and therefore it's an ambitious target? You need to understand how difficult it's going to be, don't you?
Well, yes, you need to understand the scale of it. If you want to be ambitious, you would say, well, what can be achieved?
Yeah.
What has been achieved, and therefore how can we improve on that?
Right, and you need to assess that, don't you?
Well, you will assess it, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask you now to look at the way that this scheme developed? CD 3.9.1, please, is correspondence between the airport and the council. This is a letter dated 17th of December 2019. It's sent to one of the council's officers and it's signed by Mr. Baker, your Surface Access Strategy Manager. Can I ask you to look at the second page of this, please?
Yeah.
Under the subtitle, Beyond 10 MPPA, a more ambitious target for public transport mode share, do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Our planning application for a 12 million passenger per annum capacity airport and the accompanying proposed Section 106 heads of terms was based on a commitment to maintain a public transport mode share target of 15% for passengers, with at least 25% airport employees using sustainable means of travel. And you'll see that 15% for passengers, that's the same target that was secured in the Section 106 agreement for the 10 million passenger per annum scheme, wasn't it?
That's the commitment they made, yes.
Yeah. So the opening offer from the airport when it made its application, as it says here, was to just simply maintain that, wasn't it? To stick with 15%.
In terms of the current proposals?
Yes, in terms of your current proposals. You made your application and your starting point was actually, let's maintain 15%, just as it says here.
Well, on the basis that target, at the time the understanding was that target hadn't been met and that was a difficult target to achieve.
Right. And then if we read on, next paragraph, in fact, we'll just read I'll finish the first paragraph. The transport assessment that supported the plan application assessed the traffic impact of our proposals in this context, concluded the highway impact of the development, taking into account mitigation measures proposed at that time, was acceptable in planning terms. Notwithstanding the conclusions of the transport assessment, following engagement with NSC officers and taking into account the Highways and Transport Service comments, BAL agrees to adopt revised ambitious stretching targets of 17.5% for passengers and 30% for employees, supported by additional significant investment in public transport. Do you see that?
Yes.
So the 2.5% increase that we're now discussing expressed there between 15% and 17.5%, that wasn't the basis on which this application was originally made, was it?
In terms of what was assessed in our transport reports, we were originally assessing against the 15%.
Mr. Anderson, I'm a little bit confused here. Can we just deal with where we're at? I mean, we're wasting time talking about stuff. The agreement now is 2.5%, which I thought the council was signed up to. So
we're not signed up to 2.5%, so no, it's 5%, as Mr. Troller's explained.
The figure that, yes, was floated in. Yeah, that's not supported by any analysis, so was it?
Well, but the point. So you heard what Mr. Troller said about how he got to that figure. That's his evidence there. What I'm exploring here is what analysis the airport have done. Because the point is simple. National policy requires an ambitious target. You need to assess that target. No assessment was made because all that was going to happen was you were going to have 15% rolled forward. The council pushed back and said, no, that's not good enough.
Would you want to ask him about 5% then, rather than the basis on which the application, because things have moved on, so I don't really see how it's a good use of inquiry time to talk about that.
Well, so we need to understand what assessment's been made of 2.5%, which is what's being proposed by the appellant.
Yeah, well,
And this is the history of how we get to 2.5%.
Right, I don't think the history is that useful, but we can talk about the 2.5% that's, and this is the methodology how the witnesses got to that. So if you want to talk him through that, that might be helpful.
Very well, sir. Mr. Witchells, your transport assessment, as it says here, that was based on 15%. It didn't assess an uplift of 2.5%, did it?
The original transport assessment.
Yeah.
It did. We not only did we look at that, we looked at sensitivity tests to see whether, and driven by NSC as well, looking at a lower target and a higher target.
And that shows the impact on the highway, doesn't it?
Well, it shows the change in flows and therefore
Change in flows, yeah.
what that would do to the highway, yes, but it was looked at.
But you haven't produced any assessment other than what's in your rebuttal proof of evidence, which we'll come to, which demonstrates how you justify 2.5%, do you? Where is that assessment that shows why 2.5% is justified?
There is an assessment in my proof of evidence, not in the rebuttal.
Sorry, the
but
proof of evidence, yeah. Before the proof of evidence.
Yes, so if you want to go back to where, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key things here is the airport, the operators, the Air Transport Forum that was mentioned in policy earlier. Those are important factors in understanding what to do. The commitments from the airport in terms of their investments and their ongoing review of public transport operations is part of that process. They and the operators understand their catchment, they understand where best to target those investments to achieve mode shift. At that time, they knew enough about those operations to know which things would deliver some benefits and which would be worth investing in, which is where, and part of our early work indeed was looking at what were the initial results, where might you get some improvement. In addition to that, when we looked at and listed all those measures in our TA, we did look at those measures, we did list them all, we did itemise them all. We then undertook a check of, and specifically this was the case that we were trying to achieve those mode shifts, and the authority was saying, well, we're not quite sure, we believe you can achieve this, so you need to show us. So we did produce at the time technical note 12 and technical note 25 looking at how we thought we could achieve that shift. So we actually assessed it in terms of the origins and destinations. We showed where we would get that 2.5% from, and then we looked at the services to see that we could deliver that capacity.
Where's the assessment that shows that going beyond 2.5% is not possible?
That it's not possible to go beyond 2.5%.
Yeah. Where have you assessed it to say, well, actually, we can't do any more than that?
Well, we're not required to demonstrate it's not possible. Nobody's saying it's impossible. We're saying 2.5 is a stretch target, is ambitious. If we can, and we hope we do, if those numbers can be achieved and they are successful, then of course we've committed in the 106 to an ongoing review of these numbers.
But unless
that's in a way that's even better because that's constantly stretching. So not only are we committing in the 106 to deliver those targets, but they're also to be reviewed on a regular basis, so as we can be more ambitious.
Have you assessed what would be required to get to a higher level than 2.5%?
I've assessed the measures. We have a long list of measures that we looked at, a quite comprehensive list of measures, ambitious measures, and I assessed those to see what I thought they would deliver.
But have you done the exercise of choosing a higher target than 2.5% and working out what would be required to achieve that higher target? Have you done that exercise?
No, I haven't done that.
Right.
But, for example, that might be that I need a new railway line in the station, for example.
Right. And without doing that assessment, you can't then make a judgment as to whether what you're proposing is or is not ambitious, can you?
Well, I can. I've done that assessment that says, here's where we're targeting, here's the measures we're putting in, here's what I think it will achieve if all of those things are successful.
Let's look at your proof of evidence, please. Paragraph 6.5.6 on page 64. You look here at the effects of bus improvements, don't you?
Yes.
And you produce two different scenarios that you refer to as scenario 1 and scenario 2.
Yes.
And then if we move forward to page, it's PDF page 68, paragraph 6.5.11, you come up with two quantified figures there, don't you, for your bus users. 1.9% increase in scenario 1 and a 3.1% increase under scenario 2. Do you see that?
Yeah, I think you were, sorry, on page. Sorry, which page were you on there?
Yeah, 68, PDF page 68. It's your hard copy, page 62, if you're in the hard copy. It's the top of the page, you reach your conclusion on what the percentage increase is. Do you see that, 6.5.11?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the first place where you've quantified what the increase would be from those proposed services, isn't it? It's the first time you've done this exercise.
No, we did that exercise in technical note 12, which is in CD 342. That was, I think that was in January 19.
If we look at the next part of this proof of evidence, please, your rail improvements.
Yes.
Yeah, you undertake an assessment of the improvement that you think will result from rail, don't you?
Yes.
And at the bottom, 6.5.16, you suggest it's 36,000 passengers by rail. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yep. Then we get your overall conclusion, impacts, passengers.
Yes.
And you would get your table 6.6 over the page.
Yes.
And you do bus frequency, metro bus service integration, DRT introduction, rail improvements.
Yes.
And you reach a percentage total of passengers there of 2.9%, don't you?
Yes.
In terms of the measures, other measures which you're proposing, which haven't been included here, you haven't, for example, assessed the effect of the PTI, what effect that would have on the percentage of...
No, I think the way these improvements work is that they're packages of measures. So what I sought to do here is address the ones that could quantify, and that is to look at those services. Inherent in those services is that you're going to have high quality vehicles, high quality facilities. We're committing to a PTI already in the 106, and that those are inherent. Similarly, things like information, ticketing, marketing, those are taken as they're part of the package. So they come with it. When a new service goes in, those measures are part of that new service.
The A4 air decker to Bath, that hasn't been included here, has it?
As a new service?
As part of your proposed package, does it form part of this assessment? Which I can't see it.
It's a continuation of that service to Bath. It's equally important to continue existing services that need to be supported by the airport. It wouldn't be beneficial to replace one with another.
The assessment here, table 6.6, this is the first time that we've got a quantified figure from you for what the package of benefits you're providing or suggesting will be provided, what the effect of those measures will be. That's the first time we've seen this, isn't it?
In that detail, yes, but as I mentioned in technical notes 13 and indeed 25 that were produced in January 19, there were quantified public transport numbers in there.
Well, let's go there and see if we can make a comparison then.
Well, they're not exactly the same. We've moved on from there.
Well, let's go there anyway. You've mentioned this document several times.
Yep.
It's CD 3.4.2, isn't it?
Yes.
The The first one, does that start on page 2 with the 2 sensitivity cases? Is that the technical note you're referring to?
It actually starts on page 409.
409, okay.
Sorry, 409.
Right,
342.
okay. Where's the equivalent calculation of how effective your measures are going to be in this technical note?
Well, I did just say they're not directly comparable, they're not the same assessment. What you suggested is that we hadn't undertaken any assessment of public transport capacity at all.
Right.
And I was pointing out that actually we did back in January 19, we had already reached the point of working up a similar package of measures, although it will be refined, as I say. And that looked at the forecast travel demand, as you will see in Tech Note 13 there. It looked at the catchment areas, it looked at where we were targeting mode shift, and it went on to examine, in fact, on the services that we were promoting to ensure that we had capacity in the network. And part of this was actually driven by NSC officers not believing us that we could achieve this mode shift.
Well, let's look at what your conclusion is. It's on page 413 of the PDF. It can be concluded that the current bus network serving Bristol Airport has sufficient capacity to achieve a 15% passenger mode share and beyond. Enhancements to the public transport network proposed through Airport Surface Access Strategy will complement the existing provision and assist with future growth in the future.
Yes.
The above analysis clearly indicates that sufficient capacity is available on the existing local public transport network to cater for the increased demand. However, it does not preclude the possibility that some limited enhancements may be of benefit in stimulating greater use of public transport, particularly within North Somerset, where bus mode share is currently very low. So that's the conclusion you reached in this technical note. But,
yes, and what the purpose of that, as I say, was to satisfy North Somerset, who were very sceptical that we could achieve even 2.5%, that actually, when you look at the numbers and do the analysis, there is a mechanism to do that, and there are several ways you can achieve it. But this was simply undertaking that analysis that you suggested I hadn't done at all, and it was showing that you could achieve some public transport increase.
But 15% relates to the current bus network. 3.1, the current bus network serving Bristol Airport has sufficient capacity to achieve a 15% passenger mode share. You're not pushing beyond that 15% here and assessing 17.5%, are you?
Not in that note, no.
Well, in which note did you do that then? In which note did you say, let's add the 2.5% on and assess it?
Those are other sensitivity test notes. Again, they were driven by the requirement of North Somerset officers who were doubtful that, on the one hand, the highways packages would be mitigating the scheme. On the other hand, that the public transport of 2.5 could even be achieved.
But which note, Mr. Witchells? We've looked at this one and it doesn't do that. So which note does do that? And can you take me to it? Because I'd like to ask you questions about it.
Well, I think it's not in the same format. The notes that show the higher percentage of public transport are at a summary level, so they're showing the overall numbers of passengers by public transport. They don't drill down into the detail of who will be on which service.
Will that allow us to compare to the figure that you reach of total number of passengers in your proof of evidence? Can we do a comparison between that figure and these technical notes or not?
No, as I say, the work has moved on.
Right. And the short point is this, is that there is no analysis that demonstrates that you can't go beyond 2.5%, is there? There's nothing that shows that that's a ceiling, is there?
Well, I haven't suggested it's an absolute ceiling. What I've said is I believe that's an ambitious target.
And there's no analysis which shows that it would be impractical or unviable to go beyond 2.5%, is there?
No, as I say, I didn't say it was a ceiling. I just said I don't believe it's realistic to go beyond that current level. And that view was supported at the time by the officers who were asking me whether even 15% was achievable, and we now know we're at 21.8%.
And is there any analysis that shows that it's unrealistic in the way you've said,
To go beyond that?
to go beyond 2.5% uplift?
No detailed analysis, no.
No detailed analysis. And if there's no detailed analysis, we don't know whether or not that is in fact achievable, do we?
Well, as I say, what I have done is come up with the list, the comprehensive package, looking at the catchment area, looking at where I think we can get best return in terms of achieving mode shift, targeting all of those areas. That delivers those numbers that I've presented, which lead me to believe that that 2.5% shift is ambitious. And as I say, indeed, officers at the time thought that it's unlikely that we'd even be able to achieve that. So we had to demonstrate that we thought we could be able to achieve that.
One more question, please, about public transport. This is about the use of the CAA data. Your proof of evidence, please, at paragraph 6.2.1. And what you're doing here is you're making a comparative exercise between Bristol and other airports, aren't you? We get through this, for example, your page, PDF page 62, your hard copy page.
Not just that, I'm looking at what's happened at Bristol, and I also compare with other airports.
Yeah, and if we go forward to your 6.4, paragraph 6, or section 6.4, your paragraph 6.4.1.
Yes.
We've got reference here in your table 6.3 to other airports, don't we?
Yes.
Now, is this an exercise which you think is useful or not, to compare Bristol to other airports?
Yes, I do think it's useful in the context of the national policy documents you pointed me to. I think it's important to understand where you sit against other airports, the different characteristics, and whether the measures you've introduced already are being effective or not, and therefore whether you should be doing any more.
Can I ask you to go, please, to CD 3.9.2? This is correspondence between the appellant and the council. And within that document 3.9.2, can you go to page 21?
Yeah.
Page 21, first box, BAL considers it's misleading to benchmark BAL's parking proposals and public transport modal share with other UK airports for the reasons alluded to by Jacobs in its comments, including passenger profile, environmental constraints, public transport links and mass transit.
Yeah, I didn't say benchmark, I said compare and understand differences. I personally think it's useful to do the comparison as long as you understand the differences. And as one of the things here, demographics, catchment, accessibility, proximity to cities. I personally think it's useful to do the comparison. What this is referring to benchmarking parking proposals, and there could be a whole range of different reasons why different airports have different parking provision.
Well, it's not just parking. Let's read it carefully.
No, I know it's not just parking.
It's parking
I'm just
proposals
saying,
and public transport.
I was making that very point, that it's a whole range of things, and you need to take all of the different characteristics of an airport into account. But then it is useful to just take stock and say, you know, how are we doing? It's not necessarily saying if we're not doing better than there, we're failing.
And what you have to do is you have to assess the airport on an individual basis, don't you, considering what's possible at this airport?
I think you have to do both. I think you have to see what other airports are doing, to learn from them, see if they're doing better, or look at what you're doing yourself as an airport, look at the measures, as you say. Every airport's catchment is different, every airport's characteristics and demographics are different, so you do need to when you look at what measures you're going to actually fund and introduce and implement to achieve your target, then you have to get into the specifics.
And you've got no analysis of this airport, which shows that 5% public transport mode share can't be achieved, do you?
5% increase.
Yeah. You've got no analysis of this airport, which shows that that can't be achieved.
No, what I've done, as I say, is an analysis of what I believe is an ambitious package that leads me to that 2.5% target.
Which was 5% could be achieved here, couldn't it, Mr. Witchells?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it can. I've said that's an ambitious target. It would be a good thing if we could exceed it, of course. But I think it wouldn't be realistic to set that target based on the analysis I've done.
Would it be impossible to achieve 5%?
It may be. I hope not, but it may be.
You don't know whether it's possible or not, then?
No, I said I believe our target is ambitious.
Very well.
And that's obviously the policy talks about ambitious. And that's what I believe we're doing. This is an ambitious target and set of measures.
Very well. Right, surface access infrastructure is the next topic. So do you want a short break before I do that?
Yeah, how long do you think we've got left, Mr. Henderson?
It's the shortest topic to do, so hopefully not that long. I don't know, I'm pretty much on schedule thus far. Probably another 40 minutes, hopefully no more than that.
We'll take a break now and then, yeah, let's take 20 minutes then. We'll come back at 4:15 and then we'll finish that. Possibly we might, I think you will be here tomorrow morning, I think, finishing off, because you won't. We might get to Mr. Renshaw, who's the first of the Rule 6 parties, so we might get to Mr. Renshaw.
Sorry, I was forgetting you had all the others up.
Yeah. You want to
Sorry, I'll obviously re-examine at the end. I was completely forgetting that others wanted to cross-examine.
Yeah.
Sorry, scratch my last comment. But
So you'll re-examine at the end once
yes,
you've heard from everybody?
of course, I do apologise.
All right, okay. All right, let's come back at 15:15. The inquiry is adjourned. Okay, inquiry resumed. Are you good to go?
We are, thank you very much,
Yeah.
sir. Right, surface access finally, infrastructure. Mr. Witchells. A couple of general points first. Highways improvements, they are not reserved matters. They're presented here in detail, aren't they?
In an appropriate level of detail, yes.
No, they're not reserved matters. So when the
No, I know
inspectors
that
grant
they're
plan
not
permission,
reserved
highways improvements, they're not reserved matters, are they?
No, they're not reserved matters.
You accept that, don't you?
Yes, they're part
Yes.
of the planning application.
And because they're not reserved matters, that means you're going to need to comply with the approved plans, aren't you?
Well, broadly, if you're talking about a highway scheme, it's very common to get a consent based on a scheme and then have to refine that through detailed design.
So if we pick up the plan that I handed around yesterday when we did Mr. Coller's examination in chief, this is one of the plans that's listed in the statement of common ground. We can go there if we need to, but it's one of the plans that's listed to be an approved plan, isn't it?
Yes.
And that means that when your client builds out this scheme, or whoever builds out this scheme, with the benefit of this planning permission, it needs to comply with this plan, doesn't it?
No, what's typical in these cases is that there's a reference made to this drawing and then subject to technical approval and any agreed amendments with the Transport Authority or Highway Authority. So it's fairly common. I've recently done a few actually where this level of detail plan gained consent and then that was subject and it could be altered.
But no such conditions proposed here, is it?
It's a fairly standard approach. So
No,
I don't-
that's not my question. No such condition is proposed here, is it?
Well, I'm sure we could we could revise that. It's a normal process that I'm familiar with in terms of the Section 278. It's different. The intention here is that if this is successful, that NSC take this project on and deliver it themselves. If that weren't the case, we'd be going through a Section 278 process, and I'd expect those agreements to refer to either this drawing or the latest iteration of it at that time. So it is common for highway design schemes to change post-consent.
Well, I'll put the point. If the council or indeed anybody has to implement this scheme, they will need to comply with what's shown on this drawing, and they won't be able to amend it, will they?
Well, they will with agreement with the Highway Authority.
Is that your evidence, is it?
Well, there'll be constraints. You wouldn't normally go beyond the red line for it. So you wouldn't be allowed to go beyond the red line, put it that way.
Attendance, I don't know if we're going to get a long session on this, but that is the standard approach. It's been like that for time immemorial.
Well, sir, we'll simply make submissions
We can pick it up in a condition section if we need to amend a condition.
Well, we will
wording.
simply make submissions on whether that's what's proposed as it is now and whether that's lawful, sir. We'll just do that in due course.
You can carry on, but I don't think it's particularly helpful to us.
Well, I'm happy to make submissions on it, sir. One more general point, Mr. Witchells.
Yeah.
If you're instructed for a public body in a Section 78 appeal as a expert highways consultant, and you review the scheme that's proposed, and you have concerns, safety concerns, which haven't previously been identified, do you raise those concerns in your evidence, or do you just ignore them?
No, you'd be duty-bound to raise them.
Thank you. And that's exactly what Mr. Collins has done here. He was duty-bound to raise what he considered were safety concerns, wasn't he?
He's done so, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Right, issue of Q surveys first, please. The Q-length surveys were undertaken for all the model junctions at the same time as the traffic turn-in flow counts, weren't they?
We were, yes.
Yeah. And we've got an example of this in the evidence. So CD 3.6.12, please. And within that, can you go to page 4, please? And this is your technical note TN029A.
Yes.
And internal page 5, but PDF page 8 of this document shows queue validation data, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and in your paragraph 11.1, you describe that as to check the accuracy of the model validation. That was the purpose of doing the comparison, wasn't it?
Yes, it was part of the process.
Well, it's fair to say that's an important exercise to do, isn't it?
It depends on the parameters of the junction and the data you have. It can be helpful, yes.
Your rebuttal proof of evidence, please. PDF page 10 of that. In this, you're addressing the issue of queues, and you say 2.2.5 that a validation of the models against surveyed queues was carried out as part of the junction model development process, along with other checks of geometry and signal phases. These were shared with NSC and their advisors. Are you saying there that the checks against surveyed queues were shared, or simply that other checks of geometry and signal phases? Which is this?
It's a combination. So all the data was shared, all the raw data, the queue length data that was recorded at the time of the surveys, along with all the junction coding and the results from those baseline junction models.
Can you tell me when that was? Because you don't say so here, and we'd like to check it.
I might need to come back up. It would have been sometime around May 19, I would have thought. It could be before then.
May 2019 was
I
that?
think yeah, somewhere around.
Right. Well, I'm not going to push you further on it, but perhaps if Mr. Humphreys would let you after this, perhaps you can let us know what the actual date was. We'd like to check if we received it, because we can't find them other than the one that I've just taken you to.
Right.
That's what we think we have. Even if you did share that, what you would have shared didn't compare the model results and the queue survey results.
Not where it wasn't required to, no. So where we agreed with North Somerset that it was needed, we would do that. In other cases, we would have just observed the base models and had a look at the queues to ensure that it was operating as you would expect it to in the base model.
Right, so it wasn't done in all cases, okay? Because when I look at the documents that, just going back to your PDF page 10, that you list a series of documents in your 2.2.6 and 2.2.7, other than the document that I've just taken you to, I can't see those. They're not to be found in any of those documents, are they?
They may not be in those documents listed there, no.
And if that information isn't available, then the validation of the model can't be confirmed, can it?
No, as I said, I don't agree with that. The models were taken through a rigorous checking process with Jacobs. Jacobs had access to the data. Each junction was looked at in some detail, and the base year operation of those junctions was agreed with NSC and Jacobs.
CD 7.21, please. This is the TfL modelling guidance. Within that, can you go, please, to PDF page 144 first?
721. Sorry, page.
144. And it's under the subheading calibration and validation of base models at the bottom of that page.
Yes.
Yeah. Base models must demonstrate they replicate observed conditions to a sufficiently high level of accuracy, as described, and that's in 2 further parts. We can agree that that's the purpose of calibration. It's to check the accuracy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's to ensure that those base models, if they're going to be used for analysis purposes, are giving a reasonable reflection of how they might actually perform on the ground.
Thank you. If we go over, please, to page 147. This deals here with Q data. First paragraph, Q survey data, whilst not a validation criterion, is useful when determining bottlenecks within the network. It can be used as a measure of the model's performance, and for direct comparison with scheme proposals, modelled and surveyed Qs should be compared and presented in accompanying reports. This was actually something that you did yourself, didn't you? You used the Q survey data in this way, didn't you?
Yes, as it says there, it's useful and it can be used.
Right.
It's not mandatory, it's not a requirement, but the purpose of that data is to, when you run your base model, to have a look at that Q data to satisfy yourself, and in this case NSC and Jacobs as well, that those base models were validated.
And if you don't have that data, then you're unable to do that exercise, aren't you?
Well, we did have that data. That data was collected at the time of the surveys.
Right. But if the council didn't have that data, they wouldn't be able to do that exercise, would they?
Well, the council were issued with the survey data.
I've already covered that. I've put the question in the hypothetical.
If it's hypothetical, and
if they don't have that,
if we hadn't collected Q data and the council hadn't had any Q data, then you would be missing what it suggests here, something that can be useful in your validation.
Thank you. And you'll let us know afterwards what date it was you sent it to the council, and we can check that. Where junctions are already operating at or close to their practical capacity, there's a high risk of unacceptable effects, isn't there, if the model is not properly reflecting the Qs?
If they're at capacity currently,
Yeah.
then yes, it can be that small variations up and down can change what's happening. So
Right.
it can lead to increases in queues and reductions in queues. Day-to-day variation is difficult because you go out and survey on one day, as we did, a busy day, a peak day before the school holidays. So yes, if the junction is known to be saturated, then it can be quite difficult to validate.
Thank you. Let's think now about swept path analysis. We've got your Appendix D to your proof of evidence. Can I ask you to turn that up, please? And I've got that at page 294 on the PDF. 294, sir, Mr. Witchell's proof of evidence. It's Appendix D. You explained in your evidence in chief that there were issues with this junction that you would make amendments to. You suggested they could be dealt with by changing the lane width, the markings, and possibly the alignment of the road. Do you recall that?
Yes, I was asked what sort of things you might do. So there are a range of things, but yes.
Yeah. There's very limited space to make those adjustments here, isn't it? Because this is one of those junctions that's tight up to the red line.
Well, I think there is a fair amount of space on the western side, and if you're talking about West Lane here, further north, the red line goes out quite some way. So I do think there is room to make some changes within that red line boundary.
There's no plan or assessment or otherwise that shows that the sorts of changes which you've discussed in your evidence in chief could be made within the red line area here, is there?
I've said that I believe they can be, and I've put forward one suggested type of change that might be taken forwards in my appendix. But I haven't redone the detailed design because I'm confident that those minor design alterations can be made as NSC highways engineers were as well.
But that's not something that you've measured. You haven't looked at this plan and go, right, I'm going to need to move something, I'll measure
the
it.
scheme was agreed and approved by North Somerset, and the next stage is to...
I'm sorry, that wasn't the question. That wasn't an answer to the question. You haven't looked at those minor modifications that you described in your evidence in chief you haven't assessed whether they can fit within the red line, have you?
Possible alteration and put it in there, but I haven't done a complete trawl of every single issue and redesigned around those issues which would be part of the detailed design process.
Right. So what evidence is there then before the inspector that they would fit within the red line?
Well, because they're minor in nature. We're not talking about wholesale changes and adding extra lanes or changing it to a roundabout or things like that. We're talking about minor design iteration and alterations.
Mr. Collins is right, though, isn't he, that it's so tight, the red line here, that you simply won't be able to do that, will you?
No, I disagree.
Right. Road safety audit, please. The issue between us here is one of timing. You agree that a revised RSA will be needed. You're going to do it later at the detailed stage. You don't think it's necessary here. So it's simply about when you do it, isn't it?
Yes, I've said I agree that once you proceed to the next stage of design, as would be normal, do another road safety audit.
Right. And let's have a look at some of the changes which have occurred. So can I ask you to take you back to the plan, the printout plan, please? So if we start bottom left-hand corner, where we've got junction 1 in the roundabout, do you see that?
Yes.
The proposed widening of exit from the airport, you see where that's labelled?
Yes.
So what was a left-turn merge lane is now a three-way, isn't it? 3 lanes.
It's a widened approach to the roundabout, yes.
Yeah. And the effect of removing the left-turn merge lane is that traffic's going to go through there more quickly, isn't it?
Through where? Which?
Through the proposed widened exit. Traffic's going to go through there more quickly than it would have done under the previous version.
Well, there's no reason it would go more quickly. The alignment's similar, but it does mean there's more throughput capacity, so traffic can go through in 2 lanes.
And the effect of that is there's going to be different accidents and different severity of such accidents, isn't it? And that needs to be assessed.
Well, no, it's an improvement because as you come off there currently, it goes from 2 into 1 lane. So the widening is an improvement, so it's not going to make the accidents worse if at the moment they're having to merge together.
That would be something that would be assessed in the RSA though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the next stage of RSA would look at that and say, okay, that exit now is 2 lanes.
But you're jumping the gun. You haven't done the RSA, so we don't know what the output will be.
I'm not saying I've done the safety audit. I'm not a safety auditor, but what I can say is I've done a lot of schemes where we commission safety audits, and we go through the process of safety audit designer's response and alterations to the scheme, and
stick with
particularly in dialogue with the highway authority. Once the highway authority is satisfied with the scheme, I would expect, as I've said, I would expect any changes to be picked up in a new safety audit.
Let's stick with junction 1. You'll see at the bottom of the page it says existing uncontrolled crossing retained. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the reason that's retained is because previously it was in a different location, further up the A38, essentially pretty much opposite where it says Felton Primary School, wasn't it? That's where it's proposed, but it's not going to be there anymore. It's going to be in its retained location. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And the consequence of that is by leaving the crossing in that location, it's going to be more difficult for pedestrians to understand what's going on. They're much closer to the junction, have to look in different directions, whereas before it was on a straight bit of road, much easier for pedestrians to understand where the traffic was coming from and whether it was safe or not to cross, wasn't it?
No, those are existing crossings. So what we're saying is we're not planning on this scheme. We're not planning to improve those crossings.
But the comparison between the two options.
But well, we are improving crossings in other locations to
No,
provide safe places
I'm taking
to
it
cross.
step at a time. So let's
I
just focus on this
understand that, but
crossing.
I'm saying you can't. It's a scheme. You can't always just take one item out of context and not say, oh, but we're improving routes and safety here. So that would be the route we would signpost, for example.
But that crossing closer to Junction 1 compared to the other location, that's going to have a greater impact on pedestrian safety, isn't it?
Well, I'm not. I shouldn't really be doing a safety audit on the spot, but my opinion is the crossing further down, where you were crossing 4 lanes with a smaller splitter island, could be deemed less safe than a crossing with a much wider splitter island.
Both of those changes are significant changes to the scheme, aren't they, from the previous iteration?
Yeah, I don't think they are. I think they're the design development. A significant change would be, you know, we need a roundabout there, or that alignment needs to be changed completely. Right,
Let's just think about that existing uncontrolled crossing. Can we look, please, at CD 7.3.1? This is one of the DMRB documents. And within that, can you go, please, hang on, I'll just give you the page number, sorry, I'm in the wrong document, just bear with me.
So what was the core document?
Yeah, 7.3.1, sir. In fact, no, that's not even the right document. Hence why I had the difficulty. It's 7.3.2, I apologise. And it's PDF page 115. 115.
Yeah.
And can I ask you please to look at paragraph 8.1.1 there, Mr. Witchells? Where the speed limit with...
Sorry, it's just loading.
Sorry, yeah, no, of course. Let me know when you're at CD 7.3.2, and it's page 115, PDF page 115.
It only goes up to 105.
7.3.2,
Okay, hang on.
115. That's the page, yeah. Page 115. 8.1.1.
Yeah.
So where the speed limit, Mr. Witchells, are you there? Do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
Right, where the speed limit within 100 metres of the giveaway line is greater than 40 miles per hour on any approach, and the traffic flow on any approach is greater than 8,000 two-way AADT, any pedestrian crossing facilities provided should either be signal controlled or grade separated. That applies here, doesn't it? Because it's 50 miles per hour on the south side on the approach to this roundabout, isn't it? So this is relevant guidance.
As I said earlier, when we're upgrading, it's not always possible to fully comply with DMRB. In this case, an existing crossing.
Right.
And it's not being changed. So.
Okay. So can we short circuit this and say you accept it doesn't comply with this paragraph?
If this were a new scheme with no constraints, then you wouldn't, and it were a trunk road, indeed, you wouldn't be complying. You'd have to apply for a departure.
So your reason that it doesn't have to apply here, you say, is because it's existing.
No, what I'm saying is, as I said earlier, is you look to improve wherever you can. It's an existing situation. It's part of the design development, and you know, you've pointed this DMRB that applies to motorways and trunk roads, and we can't meet that criteria of 8.1.1.
You accept you can't meet it?
We physically can't if we're already in a situation where there's an existing crossing in a 40-mile-an-hour section.
And neither of the, so if you are there, any pedestrian crossing facilities should either be signal controlled, it says, or grade separated. Now, grade separation, that's not practical here. People carrying suitcases, all sorts of stuff to get to the airport. That's not an option, is it?
No, I wouldn't advocate grade separation.
No. And if you were to make this a signal control junction, the effect of that would be to reduce capacity, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily, not if you fully signal the junction, but again, we're not advocating that. What we are doing is putting a new signal control junction and Toucan crossing down at Downside Road with a crossing that isn't there at the moment on Downside Road itself. So we're creating a safe new pedestrian path all the way along that side of the road. And one of the other things that could be looked at is the safety audit talked about guard railing being used to direct people away from that crossing point, so that may be another alternative to mitigate this issue.
And this isn't the case in the scheme where you haven't improved any pedestrian crossings, is it? You've done it in numerous places, haven't you?
Yes, we have. You can see on the drawing where the facilities are proposed.
Right, but this is one of those ones where you haven't improved it.
We haven't improved this one, no.
No.
We are, well, we're
And the
providing an alternative. We're improving this along the western edge, which is a significant improvement and provides an alternative, a safe alternative to that route.
Right, the walking, cycling, horse riding assessment. We're on the same plan and we're dealing with the same sorts of issues, but the difference between us here is more extreme, isn't it? It's not that whether you're going to provide one at detailed or now. Your position is that you don't have to provide a revision at all, isn't it?
My position is it could be updated. I don't believe, if we're doing another road safety audit, which I think is important, the walking, cycling, horse riding assessment is, again, for motorways and trunk roads. That has been done. That looks at strategic pedestrian cycle connections. It looks at the existing facilities. The principle of the scheme has been established. We've introduced all those improvements. Nothing substantial has changed in that context, so I personally don't think another one is needed.
And if you're developing a scheme where you're trying to be ambitious about maximising sustainable transport mode share, and you want to encourage people to walk or to cycle, then with the sorts of changes that you've made, in the context of that scheme, the sorts of changes between this revision and its predecessors are significant, and they're ones which, for this scheme, with the nature of its aims and objectives, requires a new assessment, doesn't it?
No, I think, again, as I mentioned, what we're doing with this scheme, as is the drawing we have in front of us, is improving walking and cycling facilities, providing a new alternative safe route, full width route, a new crossing on Downside Road, new pedestrian facilities. So I don't agree.
Let's move on junction 1 and issues of geometry. So we're in the right place on the map. We've got the shared use pedestrian and cycle route on the eastern side, and you accept that this is substandard, don't you?
On the eastern side, that's an existing facility, and although it's narrower than the guidelines say, given the volumes of people using it, that doesn't cause any problems. There's no safety, there's no accident records of pedestrian or cycle incidents along there. It's very lightly used, as evidenced by our own survey data. And we are planning to, one of the issues was vegetation clearance, one of the issues was markings and signing. Those are all part of the proposals.
You can't improve the width of that footpath, though, because of the constraints of the scheme, can you?
Yeah, it's very difficult to improve that section, that footway, cycleway along there.
Now, you produce a calculation in the Appendix E to your rebuttal proof of evidence, but in that you've not analysed how the numbers will grow in usage when you increase mode share, have you? That's not what you've done in Appendix E.
No, the numbers are so low that you know, even adding 100 to them is not going to cause any problem. These are very low flows in the context of the width of the path and the proposed new foot cycleway. The
question of levels was also raised by Mr. Collins in respect of this junction. Your rebuttal proof of evidence, please, at paragraph 2.2.43. Which is on page, PDF page 17. You say there, and you accept that drawing does not show the detail of the embankment levels, does it? Because you're going to deal with those, you say, at detailed design.
This drawing doesn't show the detail of the embankment. No, you need a 3D drawing or a section through there to show the detail of that. What the drawing does show is an illustration of it, so the wide green space.
But let's be clear, the CAD drawing that you provided to Mr. Collins that you referred to in the previous paragraph, that was a 2D drawing though, it wasn't 3D, was it?
Well, it had levels on it, so all you need to do is look at the level on the road and the footway, and then look at the level in the field next to it, and you can see there's a 2 metre level difference. That's quite easy to do, and then simple maths tells you that a 1 in 3 embankment, because you can go back 6 metres under this scheme, and it's all airport land anyway.
And neither that drawing nor any other drawing shows that the space is available for those level changes, is there?
Well, that land's owned by the airport, so that section is. But you know, you certainly wouldn't need to go beyond what's shown, as I've illustrated here. But even if you had to, you could in that case.
Can I ask you to pick up, please, CD 7.21? This is the TfL guidance. Can you
That
go
number again, Mr. Henderson?
CD 7.21, so it's the TfL modelling guidance. I think we've been to this once before earlier this afternoon.
Yep.
And within that, please, can you go PDF page 89? And there we've got 2.6.14, paragraph 2.6.14 at the bottom. Do you see that junction performance?
Yes.
And in the middle, engineers should be mindful that delay begins to increase exponentially above approximately 85 DOS. Junctions operating close to 0 practical reserve capacity corresponding to 90% DOS. Small reductions in capacity can result in a significant increase in delay. For this reason, a DOS of 90 represents an upper limit of practical capacity for signalised junctions. Unsignalised junctions typically have a lower practical capacity limit with DOS in the range of 80 to 85. Can I ask you, with bearing that in mind, to go to CD 7.22, which is the Junctions 9 user guidance, also deals with this issue. And within that, can you go please to PDF page 93? And it's the 93, CD 7.22, PDF page 93, dealing with ratio of flow to capacity. Do you see that in the middle, Mr. Witchells?
Yes.
Yeah. The RFC provides a basis for judging the acceptability of junction designs, and typically an RFC of less than 0.85 is considered to indicate satisfactory performance. This depends, however, on the context of the study, and so the user's own judgment is also required. Now, that's consistent with what we've just seen in the TfL guidance, isn't it?
It's a guide, yeah. It's saying that the RFCs of less than 0.85 indicate satisfactory performance, but it also goes on to say, depends on the context. Nowhere does that, all the TfL guidance say a level above that is unacceptable. And as I mentioned earlier in some detail, the context is very important. Are you just simply taking average flows, or are you taking, in our case, peak pre-holiday traffic flows, layering them up, adding peak airport flows on top, allowing in this case, the Arcady to peak within the peak hour? If you're then still at a level that is within, and indeed the TfL guidance talks about, if it goes beyond a practical reserve capacity of 0.
And one of the things that the context you've left out, of course, is we're dealing with a strategic road serving an airport which is wishing to grow, isn't it? That's relevant to the context of the study when we're applying this guidelines.
Yes, but we're also dealing with a road where if, without the development and the growth to 10 million, even without the growth to 10 million, there will be substantial queues and delays on that corridor. With the improvement scheme, without question, there'll be a massive reduction in queues and delays. And if that means that junction, in the way we've modelled it with all those worst case assessments, is showing that it's just within capacity, that's still a massive improvement over what's there now.
And in the context of a airport served by a strategic road like this, which is seeking to grow, it's not appropriate to depart from those recommended levels, is it?
In what context?
Well, in the context of this junction 1, which we've just been looking at.
No, in the context of the study and the way I've approached it and the way I've agreed those worst case parameters with North Somerset, I don't agree with you.
Right. CD 2.20.3, which is the addendum TA. Can I ask you to go there, please, and go to page 48 of that document? Page 48. Sorry, I hope I was. I'm fiddling on here. Page 48. And we've got table 5.2 there, Mr. Witchells. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Yeah. We look down to the PM peak, A38
Yes.
north at 0.94. Do you see
Yes.
that in the column RFC?
Yes.
A38 south, 0.89.
Yes.
Do you see that? Both of those are over what we've just been looking at in the guidelines, aren't they?
They're over the values that say that they're below those performance.
And if
It's
we
not a concern.
If we look at your rebuttal proof of evidence, you've done some further analysis here.
Yes.
Your table 2.1, your rebuttal proof of evidence table 2.1, which is on page 18. Now, what we see here in your A38 South PM peak, you've got 0.84, haven't you? See that?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, the assessment that you've done here, you've told us you've removed double counting, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's less robust, isn't it, than the other assessments that you did in your TAA?
In one respect, but it's still the peak traffic flows pre-holiday. It's still got the August peak airport traffic on it. All I've done is remove what we knew to be the double counting element. So
and in a situation where you
that's
made
only
it,
one of those worst case things that's been taken out. In that respect.
and in situations such as that where you remove one of those safeguards that you insert into the TAA, that's exactly the sort of situation where you need to be considering what would happen in the slower growth scenario. You have to be sensitivity testing it because you're removing one safeguard, and you need to sensitivity test to see, well, hang on, if we do this on a less robust basis, what's the consequence?
Well,
and you haven't done that, have you?
Removing one of many, and again, the context is that this, in this case, this is below what you say is an unacceptable threshold of 0.85, which I disagree with for junctions in urban areas and congested areas.
And if
I don't think you do need to do that, because I've demonstrated with a whole range of additional layers, this could still work. This junction would still work.
Let's move on to a different junction, junction 4A, please. GA38 Downside Road. We've already dealt with the question of the shared route, not going to go over that, but the addendum, please, CD 2.20.3, PDF page 46. Just make clear that's I think I've done the PDF and the actual page numbers the wrong way around, sorry. It's not this one. Don't worry, we don't need to go to that. I'll put the point. The degree of saturation here, that's 88.2%, isn't it, for this junction in the peak?
It's within capacity, yes.
Yeah, but you accept that's the figure in the peak, don't you?
I'm just, where were you? I'm not sure where you...
Yeah, I thought I'd short-circuit it.
I'll find it. I'm just looking.
No. Yeah, it's PDF page 53. I have done that thing where I've given you the paginated page, I'm afraid, not the PDF page. So it's paginated 46, PDF page 53. And
so where were you, what were you asking? Was there a question
A38
there, sorry?
Downside Road, PM. A38 north ahead and left. You see that 88.2% degree of saturation?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Yeah. And when we look at your design here on the plan, the red markings, they're the red tactile paving, aren't they? Because this is now the main pedestrian and cycle crossing, isn't it?
Yes,
and that's
yeah.
an indicator of that. Yeah. And you haven't considered the effect of that increased pedestrian and cycle usage in your junction capacity analysis, have you?
Yeah, I've rerun this junction in the rebuttal to show what would happen if the signal pedestrian phases were called up, to show that it did still work.
You
Yes.
didn't do that before the rebuttal, though, did you? And I'll go to your rebuttal.
And what I've said is that this was looked at with Jacobs and NSC, and the conclusion was they're called up so infrequently, even with some growth, that it wasn't necessary. So, on the basis of Mr. Collis's criticism, I produced that run to show what would happen if the signals were called up, to show that the junction did still operate within capacity, even under, again, those worst case, layer on layer worst case flows. And again, we're only talking about a very busy month of traffic flows, applying the busiest peak of airport flows, and throughout that whole day, you're looking at one peak hour of that whole day, of that whole year.
And in your Appendix G, the numbers that you've used, they're not the actual numbers, though, are they? You haven't looked at what the growth is going to be when you seek to increase public transport, the use of people by walking and cycling across these junctions. You haven't looked at that actual numbers.
But we've looked at the existing numbers to see if there is a strong latent demand, which there isn't. And then we've said, well, if, even if that goes up quite significantly, and we wanted to call up that signal stage 5 or 6 times an hour, then that would work.
But that increase that you've done, you've not calibrated that against the actual growth that's going to result from this scheme, have you? It's just a guess. You've just gone, well, we'll bump it up a bit higher. But you don't know if that's going to reflect the same or less or more than what the actual growth is, do you?
I know I don't need to, because when you're introducing these phases, these crossings would have quite a big capacity, and they can be called up fairly frequently. So,
but there's no assessment of whether that's actually going to be sufficient.
Well, it's very rare to actually, and unless you go into micro-simulation modelling, which hasn't been the case here, hasn't been required, it's very rare to actually model those pedestrian crossings in that way, unless, of course, you have any reason to believe they will be incredibly busy, which I don't.
Right, let's look at junction 4B, please. We've dealt with footpaths, and that's the repeating point. Let's look, though, at the question of the merge length here. Can I ask you to pick up, please, CD 7.3.4? And within that, that's one of the DMRB documents, and within that, can you go, please, to PDF page 54? And you'll have a diagram in the middle of that page, and
Just looking for it, sorry.
that's all right.
734.
It's 7.3.4.
Yep. Which page did you say?
54. And you'll see figure 7.10.1.
Yes,
Yep. And the text above it, where it's necessary to reduce the number of lanes on the exit arm,
yes.
a single lane should be reduced over a distance of 100 metres starting at or beyond the limit of the junction into visibility zone. Do you
Yes.
see that?
I do.
And then when we look at the, going back to the plan, what you've done here is you've started the measurement from where the carriageway starts to narrow, haven't you?
No, we started the measurement where DMRB requires you to, which is beyond the limit of the junction into visibility zone, or sorry, starting at the limit of the intervisibility zone. That's exactly what we've done.
Where you've got a road which is narrowing like this, the appropriate place to start that is from that point of narrowing, isn't it?
That's not what DMRB says. It says at the limit of the junction into visibility zone in 7.10.1.
If we look at your rebuttal, please, Appendix 8. You've reduced the length of the two lanes, haven't you?
Which page did you
Oh, sorry, Appendix 8. Sorry, I forgot to give you the reference. It's in your rebuttal proof of evidence. And Appendix H, it's almost at the back, I think.
I'll scroll to the end.
PDF number.
Yeah.
page number.
Sorry, I went to your real proof of evidence. Yeah, it's 169.
Ah, right, thanks.
This is where you've reduced the length of the two lanes, haven't you?
This is one of the areas I said, well, you know, looking at the sort of minor change that might be explored, this could be one that you would do within the red line.
Yeah.
And you know, to continue to comply with DMRB.
And you're reducing here it's on the exit, isn't it? From this junction that you're reducing the two lanes.
The northbound exit.
Yeah.
We're changing the markings rather than reducing the exit.
What that means is that the drivers are less likely to use the outside lane here because they don't want to merge, do they?
The use of two lanes and merges varies throughout time of day. Off-peak, you tend to only use one lane because it's not very busy out, and when it gets busier at peaks, drivers tend to use both lanes and go through the stop line in spurts. The reason for the two lanes is so as when that's green and they go through in two lanes, that they can still do that safely and then also safely merge. That's the purpose of the 100 metres beyond the intervisibility zone in DMRB.
And the effect of what you've done by reducing the length here you would need to reduce the traffic in the outside lane yet further to account for the driver behaviour, wouldn't you?
Well, these are lane markings, so I don't agree. We haven't reduced the length. We've actually widened the geometry, which would have the effect of effectively increasing the length, depending on how you marked it out. And in the way it's modelled, indeed, the number of vehicles in the offside lane is already lower than those in the near side lane.
The splitter island now, please, which is on the other side. We're dealing with the west lane, splitter island. You agree in your rebuttal that this is going to need to be set back, don't you?
I do, yes.
Yeah. If we look at the swept path analysis of this is your Appendix D, back into your proof of evidence, please. Your Appendix D. And we have that on page 294, it starts, PDF 294. What the swept path analysis here shows is that you can't move that splitter island back any further because it's simply too tight. It's going to be overrun, isn't it? That's what this swept path shows.
Yes, I agree. You would need to move that back and make it an overrun area rather than a solid curved island.
You're not proposing a cantilever here?
Well, it's an option, but as I say, that's part of design development. You're referring to the traffic signal head, presumably, for the way we would put the traffic signal in. So you could have a near side primary on the verge. You could have one on the central island in the middle of the A38. You could have a signal on the other side of the A38, or you could, as you suggested there, potentially have a cantilever. I think that would be not required, but you could.
We don't have any assessment of that, though, do we, before us?
Well, no, but in my expert opinion, looking at that layout and my knowledge of design and engineering, I can make that work.
Question of capacity at this junction. CD 2.20.3, please, which is the TAA addendum. And within that, page 53, please. And when we look at the very bottom, the PM peak, we're seeing a degree of saturation of 89.7%, aren't we?
What page number?
53, sir. PDF page 53.
Yeah.
Seeing 89.7% degree of saturation, do you see that?
Right, yes, the highest degree of
That's right,
saturation
yeah. in the peak.
of
yeah.
all of them in the PM peak,
Yep.
yes.
And the junction here, we can see, I think it's showing, or certainly was on the previous plan, it incorporates an unsignalised pedestrian and cycle crossing, doesn't it?
In this test, yes, at that point it did, yes, because we, again, North Somerset agreed it didn't need to be modelled.
Yeah, so it wasn't included in the junction capacity analysis.
No, but it has been, as I say, in my updated assessment that's in the rebuttal.
Yeah, but so we're back to the same point on that. That's one that you've reduced the double count in to make it less.
No, not at this junction. I haven't changed any of the flows at this junction. I only did that at roundabout 1. At this junction, the flows are exactly the same as assessed in the TAA.
Just go to your rebuttal proof of evidence, please, paragraph 2.2.66. I don't think in light of what we've... No, we can skip that. Let's move on. That's a bit quicker. Junction 6, please. We know that this is exceeding capacity, you said in your examination, Chief, in the AM, the inter and the PM peak scenarios, isn't it? Do you want me,
Yes.
do you want me to take
yeah.
that? You
No,
accept
that's
that?
fine. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't propose any mitigation for that, do you?
No, I don't.
All right. Your proof of evidence, please, page 45. And for the A38 Barrow Lane, we can see that the effect of the development, you're going to increase the flow by 71 vehicles in the AM and 268 in the PM, aren't you?
On the A38, yes.
On the A38, yeah.
Sorry, which page are you on? 45, did you say?
45, yeah, PDF page 45. Sorry, the proper page number. Oh, sorry, paper copy 39. Now, are you there, Mr. Witchell? Sorry, I'll let you.
No,
Okay, do you want me to give it?
I know where you are, but I'm trying to find it.
Okay, no, that's okay. Take your time, no problem at all.
Oh, you, did you say proof of evidence?
I was just putting the, yeah, I'll give it to you again. Are you on the PDF?
Yes, is it 5628 paragraph number?
No, it's your proof of evidence. I think it's just getting to that time of the day where we're all looking at the wrong documents.
Yeah, it's saying I'm in my proof of evidence, and it's not.
Yeah.
Let me try this again. Let me do it the proper way.
I'm sorry, I'm only taking you here to then take you to another document immediately, so it's one of those exercises that's frustrating.
I'll just reopen it. You seem to be doing something odd.
It's simply if you accept that the flows increase. It wasn't particularly complicated. So we just need to see the flows, Mr. Witchell, before we then look at the effects. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and you see the increase of 71 vehicles in the AM and 268 vehicles in the PM.
Yes.
Yep. Right. And you accept that's the effect of the proposed development.
Yes.
Now, if we see what you say about this in the transport, thank you very much, Mr. Humphreys, I appreciate that. The transport assessment addendum, PDF page 56, so this is CD 2.20.3, PDF page 56.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got your table 5.9, and immediately below that, paragraph 5.7.2, do you see that?
Yes.
Modelling, you say, shows large queues in all tests on the Barrett Lane side road. It was noted in site observations that traffic is able to emerge from the junction due to gaps in traffic partly caused by the platooning effect of traffic from the Barrow Street signalised junction located north of the junction. In reality, therefore, more gaps in traffic arise than the Piccadilly model predicts. But the difficulty with that, though, of course, is that you've already undertaken capacity corrections using slope and intercept in your modelling to account for that. So you've already accounted for the platooning effect, and you can't now rely on it as a mitigation of this effect, because it's already been adjusted.
Yeah. This is one rare junction where I would agree that it is so oversaturated that the modelling results are not necessarily able to reflect what happens on the ground. Even though, as you mentioned, there's an intercept adjustment, that still doesn't account properly for the fact that drivers will find gaps and will push out. So where there is a downstream or upstream signal that creates gaps, for example, that's not modelled in the Piccadilly. The intercept correction doesn't model that as well as a linked microsimulation model would, for example. So it is difficult to judge that, but I'm not challenging the fact that the junction is oversaturated and there are big queues and delays.
There's not going to be any greater performance benefit in reality than you've seen in the models, though, is there? Stepping back and applying your judgment to this?
As I say, this is one example where it is so far over that you can't really tell. I think that
Okay.
it would, you know, people do get out. It would work better. I'm not saying it's fine. I'm saying the model isn't. You know, models are okay in this case. You can compare the numbers, but it's telling you in that case the side road is oversaturated.
Your rebuttal proof of evidence, you addressed this issue, PDF page 23, real life page 18. Just want to ask you about your comments there. Rat running, that's not a serious proposition. So I'll wait till you're there. Are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. You address this 2.2.88 and then on, and then in your 2.2.89, you suggest that would capacity improvements would encourage or promote, you say, rat running. But the length of the queues is such that even if you were to make those performance improvements, that's not going to result in rat running in this way, is it?
Well, I'd say it could, because it's difficult to tell when the junction is, that side road junction is over capacity. So it may, if you put traffic signals on there and you've got that queue down to clearing the green wave every cycle, then I'm sure it would attract additional traffic.
And the other reason why that's not going to happen is this just isn't an obvious rat run, is it?
Well, it's a road that's used and has flows on it currently, so
you haven't identified a particular route which is going to give rise to rat running, have you? Because there isn't one.
No, I mean, this was a dialogue with officers, and it was a point of debate that was it desirable to improve the capacity for that side road? And as you've seen from the officer's report, the answer was, on reflection, no.
The second part of this paragraph, you say that some traffic using this route is more likely to reassign to an alternative route, but you haven't done an assessment to show how that would work, have you?
No, I haven't modelled that.
And this is one of those junctions where if you were, you referred in your evidence in chief to the issue of slowing down if you were to make some junction improvements. Do you remember that?
Sorry, if you were.
Yeah. So in your evidence in chief, you said, well, if we had improvements here, we'd have slowing down on the MRN.
Oh, I see. You're on the
yeah
major road network.
Yeah.
You'd obviously affect the flows on that road, and they would have to stop. So it would, by virtue of them having to stop, increase delays on that corridor.
But there's nothing particularly surprising about that here, because that's the same effect that you have at junction 4B, don't you? You have the same slowing on the major road network where you've made
No, you don't. Not if you compare what would happen without development with development. You have a significant improvement and a significant reduction in overall journey time.
Junction 7, please. This is the A38, A4174 South Bristol link.
How much longer do you think you're going to be, Mr. Henderson?
Junction 7's the last one, sir.
Oh,
so you're in luck. I've got Junction 7 and then two small matters about the CPO, and then we're there. So, well, I thought I was there. Yeah, that really is it. So I promise it. Junction 7, and then we'll just cover off the CPO in a moment. This is a question of slivers. So can we look at the modelling guidance, please? TfL modelling guidance at CD 721. Page 105, PDF page 105, that is at paragraph 3.11.1. And this is where we get the explanation of the sliver queues. It commences, and then we've got the diagrams, and then if I ask you to turn over 2 pages, we get the explanation, page 106, of when a sliver queue occurs, and then 107 at the top. A modeller can recognise the formation of a sliver queue by examining the elements in queue data or uniform queue graph. And then we get the illustration of figure 10. The data will highlight a small amount of traffic in the queue relative to the total queue length, and figure 10's on the page that we've just come over. So that's page 106. That figure there, that shows a typical sliver queue, doesn't it, Mr. Witchams?
Yeah, I'm just reading that. It appears to, yes.
Yeah. Can I ask you then to pick up your rebuttal proof of evidence where you produce comparable graphs? So that's your rebuttal at PDF page 24. And your figure
Sorry,
2.1.
PDF.
In the,
Yeah.
are you there? Your
Yes,
figure
thanks,
2.1.
yeah.
Yeah. In the middle graph and the right hand graph, you see those two?
Yeah.
Neither of those are sliver queues, are they? Because they're not a small amount relative to the total queue length, are they?
No, the point about a sliver queue is the peak during the green discharge point of the signal cycle. So what the TfL guidance says is, that's a moving queue, so actually you can de-sliver the modelling by saying, that actually isn't a real queue, that's a moving queue, which it is in all of these cases, as you can see.
But in the second and third, to be really clear, in the second and third figures there, they're not sliver queues or moving queues, are they?
Yeah, partly yes, they are.
Well, if we bear in mind,
Queue is still going up during the green, so that's how it works. And then it's actually in reality not going up because that's a moving queue.
the effect, if we take, for example, the third of those, if we look in, we're dealing with 7 PCUs here, aren't we?
We are, yeah, in that
Yep.
sliver queue, yes.
And I've had the benefit of zooming in. I'm not sure. I think Mr. Humphreys is straining, but if you zoom in and look at the line at the end of that, the grid line at the end of that queue, the sliver queue, that extends beyond the end of the green wave, doesn't it?
Well, I think if you look how pixelated that is, that's not the case, because and you would find when you look at the degree of saturation of that lane that it will be well within capacity. That's how you design and manage signalised roundabouts. You ensure that all of the internal stop lines are well within capacity, and that the approach links to the signalised roundabout are the ones that stack up with the queuing.
Penultimate topic. Your modelling, the council, if the council had wanted to, we didn't have the available data from you in order to reproduce your models, did we? For example, we didn't have the August flows, we didn't have a flow of disaggregated airport traffic, no future year for pedestrian cycling. There was a range of data we would have needed if we wanted to do that, but we didn't have from you. That's fair, isn't it?
Well, you didn't request the models.
I'm not saying we requested it.
You had all the model printouts, so you could have reproduced them without question.
Well, I'm going to put it to you that we couldn't have done that.
Well, you could. It's a fact.
Right, CPO scheme, please. This was raised a number of times. We're going to deal with this principally with Mr. Lansdowne when we get to the CPO, so I'm going to be very quick given the time. But can I ask you to look at Mr. Lansdowne's proof of evidence, please, which you'll have to find on the core documents, and it's paragraph 3.1 through to 3.5 of that. Just bear with me, I've got to do the same.
The CPO proof, did you
The
say?
CPO proof of Mr. Lansdowne for the council. And his 3.1 through to 3.5, which starts on PDF page 5.
Yes.
You see that in 3.1, first sentence, Mr. Lansdowne explains that it's a standalone scheme. Do you see that?
Well, as a standalone scheme, yes.
Yeah. And then when we read down 3.3 is where I'd like to focus. Following the Council's refusal of Bowell's planning application, the A38 MRN scheme has been taken forward as a standalone joint venture scheme. As a consequence, the funding for the A38 MRN scheme will need to come from both the Council and Somerset County Council in the absence of a financial contribution from Bowell as envisaged as part of Bowell's scheme. Subsequently be developed to include the benefit of proposed active travel plans at some other locations on the A38, providing improved infrastructure and area connectivity for pedestrians and cyclists. Now, in your evidence in chief, you were taken to, I think it was an earlier iteration of the strategic outline business case. Do you recall that in the series of questions? Yeah. And that document that you were taken to, that dates from 2019, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
Yeah, and that's before the refusal of this application by the council, isn't
Yes.
it? Yeah, and since then, the council, as Mr. Lansdowne has explained, has taken that on as a standalone scheme, isn't it?
That's what he says here, yes.
Yeah. So he'll explain in due course, but this is not a case where the council are any longer relying on you to apply for planning permission, are they?
I think what I was questioned on is what that SOBC said, and that is what it said. If you're telling me that that position has changed, and based on this evidence, then
You'd accept
I don't
it's changed
question
based
it.
on this evidence,
It's a
wouldn't you?
statement. You're telling me that is the case. I can't question the fact that the council has changed its position, albeit the only place it's been said is in this evidence here.
Now, the council is undergoing a consultation process, and we've heard about that already.
Yes.
And as a result of that, the council can develop the design, can't it, of the improvement works that it wants to undertake?
Yes, it can.
Yeah. And if those developments need the red line of its scheme to move, then there's nothing to stop that. The council can simply move it as is necessary.
No, well, one of the key bits of an outline business case is to look at delivery and timescale and risk, and it would be a factor to take into account that they don't have planning permission for it. If they wanted to make it larger beyond the red line, they would need a new planning application. If they needed to acquire land, they would need to do that. So,
Well, of
so
course.
it would be. I've done a lot of outline business cases. It would be a significant risk to factor in if you knew you had to kind of start again.
Yeah, but by comparison, if the council need to move its red line, acquire a different land or more land, that's something the council can do, but that you can't do sitting here with your scheme presented in this way in your application, can you? You're past that point.
The council can move the red line, but they've still got to acquire the land. And that would be seen as quite a risk by the Department for Transport when you're bidding for funding.
You can't move the red line though, can you?
No, our red line is fixed.
No. Thank you very much. I think that's pretty much it. Just bear with me one moment, please, Mr. Witchell. Yeah, just to follow up on the point, paragraph 3.5, look at Mr. Lansdowne's proof of evidence, but just scroll down, please, to paragraph 3.5.
3.5, yeah.
Further and separately, the evidence of Mr. Collins has identified a number of technical deficiencies and additional data and analysis requirements for the improvements proposed as part of BAL's scheme. Detailed design work on the A38 MON scheme is currently ongoing to provide a solution that does not suffer from these technical defects. This is an important indication that the public interest is best served by the A38 MON scheme, not BAL's. Now, leave aside the public interest, that's for the CPO part, but just focus on what the council is doing here. This is not a situation where the council have simply ignored Mr. Collins's concerns, have they? They've actually taken them on board and they're making amendments as a result. That's right.
Well, they may be, but the drawing I've seen doesn't suggest that, which was dated June this year.
Yeah, and that's That's because the work is ongoing. It's not fixed. There's a
But
consultation. Other people might
All I'm
have...
saying is I haven't seen that evidence.
Okay.
You're suggesting to me that, you know, it is currently ongoing, but the drawing we've been issued is almost identical to the...
And this isn't a situation where... This isn't a situation where officers have just simply turned around to Mr. Collins and said, what you're talking about, we think this is fine. They've actually looked at that and gone, hang on a minute, we need to make some amendments. That's what Mr. Lansdowne's explained. That's the process that's ongoing, isn't it?
I haven't been party to those conversations, so I can't agree or disagree with you.
You don't have any evidence that contradicts it, though, do you?
I don't have any evidence that supports it or contradicts it, no.
Thank you very much. That's everything, sir.
Thank you. All right, okay.
Yeah, just before we conclude, not in relation to this witness, don't worry. Ms. Sutherland, I think you're still with us. Can you just... Perhaps not. Yes. Yeah, just to save an email trail, I've had a request from Ms. Sutherland under, I think it's Rule 13 of the procedure rules, to direct the Council to disclose a document. The document itself is the delegated report. I'm not sure why I would, but just to say it's on the publicly available website. I've just checked it. So...
Thank you, sir. If it's gone on the website this afternoon, I appreciate that. It hasn't been forwarded to me as I'd requested, and obviously I've been in here, so I've not been able to check the website. But if it's there, then I'm pleased to
Council's
hear
saying
it.
it has, but in any event, it's on the website. So
Thank you, sir.
just thought I'd deal with that matter. Do you want to check timings?
No, well...
I suppose the only other thing is I was looking forward to reading a load of conditions and a 106 obligation this evening. I don't know where any of that is. We've not had anything back from the programme officer, so I'm slightly assuming she hasn't got anything.
I've been in here with you, sir. I don't know.
I think it's going to be imminently with you, but it is coming from Bal. But we got some comments back on the draft that we sent through that added some new bits that we haven't had time to look at because we wanted you to get it. So it's coming to you with a note to that effect.
We can do it on the hoof tomorrow, but it would be better if we could have, all of us could have something to look at.
That's why we've asked for it to be what was produced to be handed in.
And will somebody from your team, Mr. Humphreys, be able to talk us through the Section 106 in as much as it's the highway obligations are concerned? There's the ASAS, isn't there? I wonder if there's any other things in there that we need to discuss tomorrow.
Yes, I'm sure someone will be able to talk through it, and maybe we'll have to, because various people have been involved, maybe there'll have to be more than one person, and I suspect I will end up having to talk about it as well. Again, because I've been in here, I just don't know quite what may have changed or not have changed. Mr. Taylor knows.
I can help a little bit. The note that you're going to get soon has Bal has put an earlier draft of the relevant parts from the 106 in that note. We, however, have been working on that text, and because we're still working on it, I didn't want to burden you with a sort of half-finished draft. So we've got points that we'll need to raise, but we'll do it in sort of relatively general terms, if that's acceptable tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is, and I've made this to a couple of the Rule 6 parties in writing, that the session tomorrow is only part one, or is it part two, of the conditions discussion, and we've got the full-blown conditions discussion in, 3 or 4 weeks' time. So, I mean, anything we can bottom out tomorrow.
Being brutally honest, we were expecting just to be discussing conditions tomorrow at the start of the week, and so for that reason, we weren't quite as up to speed on the 106. So
we'd like to give you some work to do.
I can only apologise for that, but that's the
No,
reason.
seriously, I mean, it is very much an interim session, and any progress we can make, that's great, and if we don't, it'll knock on.
We'll do our best to assist everybody, as I'm sure we all will, but that's where we are.
Mr. Morehouse, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, sir. It's really by way of raising a matter of information that we've been made aware of today, which is that the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy has today announced the new proposed carbon values. They make quite significant alterations to the position that was being discussed both in forecasting and also the economic situation. And so, by way of example, for the year 2022, the previous central value was put at £26. The new central value is now put at £248. So significantly, I think, 9 times greater than 9 times higher. The 2030 figure, for example, is a £78 figure for the central figure, now put at £280, 3.5 times higher. And clearly this has quite significant ramifications, I think, for both forecasting and also the other issues that we discussed earlier on. I'll raise it at this stage. Obviously, people will need to digest the information and comment on it. I don't propose saying anything else other than that at this stage, unless someone thinks it's helpful.
No, thank you. He said through gritted teeth. Thank you very much, Mr. Morehouse, for that information. People always do that sort of thing midway through an inquiry, but it's seriously, it's useful information. I think we'll all have to have a look at that, and then we can work out what we do with it. But thank you for drawing that to our attention.
Right, unless there's anything else, which I don't think there is, we'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Inquiry is adjourned. Thank you.